With the start of the new year comes the Lunar New Year, a holiday for families to come together, cook delicious food and enjoy each other's company. But 32-year-old Jia isn't happy. She's an out-of-work freelancer, though most would say she's unemployed. As she prepares food for the guests who have yet to arrive, her mother is sitting nearby, watching a cute video of her grandson. Jia, however, is irritated. Her family is getting in her way and eating the food she's cooked before the guests even arrive. When Jia suggests that her parents should cook since they're already eating, her mother reminds her that cooking is the least she could do, especially since she's still living at home without paying rent. Soon, Jia's sister Jimin arrives with her family. Their mother warmly embraces Jimin's daughter, while her husband carries their young son. Jimin, exhausted from the trip, immediately wants to sit down. Jia steps out of the shadows to greet her sister, offering her an almost forced smile. "Happy to see you," Jia says, handing Jimin a flower print apron. Jimin laughs and teases her, saying the apron looks great on Jia and that all she needs now is to walk down the aisle. Jia, not amused by the joke, coldly insists that Jimin put the apron on to help her cook. Their mother, not impressed by Jia's attitude, lightly scolds her. All Jia wants is for someone else to take over the cooking, but Jimin's husband steps in, explaining that Jimin is already exhausted and subtly hinting that she's pregnant with their third child. This announcement is big news for the family, and they gather around to eat soon after. Later, Jia steps outside to smoke, frustrated with her sister's seemingly perfect life and the constant pressure to meet someone. Her brooding is interrupted by a man she doesn't recognize at first. "Still got that foul mouth, I see," he says, surprising her. He's standing in the smoking area, eating chicken breast, which catches Jia off guard. After a moment, the man introduces himself as Minchul Jin. Minchul mentions that he used to live next door and wore headphones all the time. Jia doesn't recognize him at first, but then realizes he was that scrawny gamer kid from her childhood. Minchul, however, doesn't think he's changed much. Jia insists otherwise, pointing out how strange it is to see him eating chicken breast in a smoking area. Minchul explains that he's here because his family wasn't happy with him avoiding the Lunar New Year food. Too many calories, they said. Jia suddenly remembers that Minchul is the same age as her, 32, and that they grew up in the same building. They were childhood friends, but not by choice. Minchul was the shy kid who didn't get along with anyone in class. Despite the shared past, Jia doesn't feel like reminiscing. Instead, she wonders how Minchul managed to change so much. She concludes that city life must have transformed him. Now, he's an assistant manager and programmer at a well-known company, living what seems to be a decent life. This realization makes Jia reflect on her own situation. She's constantly scolded at home, unemployed, and can't believe that Minchul, the awkward kid from her childhood, is doing better than she is. Feeling a surge of envy, Jia begins to sulk. Sensing her mood, Minchul interrupts and asks how she's been. Jia deflects the question, but Minchul keeps talking. He admits that while he thinks he's doing well, his parents don't agree. They've been nagging him to get married and even signed him up for a dating service, paying a $5,000 registration fee. With a small laugh, he assumes Jia isn't facing the same pressure. Jia, surprising even herself, suddenly suggests that they get married. Minchul is taken aback, staring at her in disbelief. Jia explains her reasoning. Since both their parents are constantly nagging them to settle down, marrying each other would solve the problem. "It's a win-win," she says casually. To Jia's further surprise, Minchul, though still in shock, asks her father for his blessing, and before they know it, they're married. For their honeymoon, they travel to a tropical destination. On their first night, while Jia is having a drink, the reality of what's happened finally hits her. She stares into her glass, shocked that she isn't dreaming. She's actually in a different country, married to Minchul. Later that night, as they prepare for bed, Minchul rummages through his suitcase. Jia watches him, wondering what he's looking for. When he mentions that he's searching for something to make their first night together comfortable, Jia's mind jumps to conclusions. Embarrassed, she blurts out that she's not ready for that yet, but to her surprise, Minchul simply hands her a pair of earplugs. "Sometimes I snore," he explains with a sheepish grin. That night, after Minchul starts snoring, Gia puts in the earplugs and drifts off to sleep, noting how practical and prepared he is. The next morning, Gia starts worrying that their happy honeymoon could go downhill if they start fighting. As she carefully selects her outfit, Minchul appears in unfashionable but comfortable clothes, including socks with sandals. He asks how much longer Gia's going to take. She winces at his outfit, and when he asks if it matters, Gia insists it does because people will be looking at them. Since their schedule isn't tight, they decide to go clothes shopping. Although Gia doesn't know much about fashion, she assumes anything would be better than Minchul's current outfit. But she's wrong. Minchul emerges from the dressing room in a bright red and blue outfit with suspenders. His reasoning? The bright colours will keep him from getting hit by a car. Gia, frustrated, hands him a simple shirt and pants, telling him they look nice. Minchul is so pleased that he asks the store clerk for 7 sets of the same outfit. Outraged, Gia tries to explain that it's better to have a variety, but Minchul is insistent. Since the outfit looks good, he wants multiple copies. Gia decides to pick out a few new outfits herself so Minchul can rotate between them. While she's browsing, Minchul notices the swimsuits and, with sudden excitement, asks if he can choose one for her for their upcoming banana boat ride. Without thinking, Gia agrees, but then quickly feels embarrassed, realizing what he's just asked. After finishing their shopping, they head to the shore, but Gia can't shake her embarrassment about Minchul picking out her swimsuit. Gia feels obligated to wear the swimsuit Minchul bought for their next activity, even though she has no idea what he chose. She fears he might have picked a sexy one, but to her surprise, Minchul bought her a wetsuit, matching his. To Minchul, it was the best choice, offering comfort and insulation. However, Gia feels embarrassed by his choice. After all, this is their honeymoon and everyone else is wearing bikinis and swim shorts. She worries that the wetsuit will be too hot, but to her surprise, it turns out to be very comfortable. The two have a wonderful time on the banana boat, eating, laughing, and taking pictures throughout the day. As the sun starts to set, Gia and Minchul walk along the beach. Gia, wanting to make the most of their expensive trip, tries to pack in as much as possible. Minchul, however, notices an injury on her heel and suggests she take it easy. Gia hadn't realized she was hurt, caught up in the excitement. Minchul offers to give her a piggyback ride, insisting that walking on an injured heel must be painful. Gia hesitates, concerned about sticking to their schedule, but eventually hops onto Minchul's back. Feeling embarrassed, Gia asks if she's heavy. Minchul, always practical, responds that her weight makes it a good workout, which offends her a little. As they continue walking, Gia begins to feel comforted by Minchul's steady presence and warmth. She notices the beautiful sunset and insists they take a picture. Minchul initially resists, but Gia insists, saying they should live in the moment. Back at the hotel, Gia scrolls through the pictures and remembers her sister's words about how couples usually fight on their honeymoon. But despite her worries, she and Minchul didn't argue at all. They had fun together. As she watches Minchul peacefully sleeping, Gia reflects on the trip and, despite the embarrassing moments, feels content and satisfied with how it all turned out. Back in Korea, Gia's mum prepared a feast and packed several boxes of food to celebrate Gia's return and help her move in with Minchul. Although Gia feels apprehensive about the whole situation, she reminds herself that she agreed to this when they got married. After the move, Minchul hands Gia a piece of paper. At that moment, a random memory pops into Gia's mind. A cartoon theme song with the lyrics, "Just do it, just do it. It's okay to make mistakes because you aren't an adult yet." Gia now realizes that, as an adult, making mistakes means you're stuck dealing with the consequences. Since she was the one who suggested they get married, Gia reflects on how her life has spiraled out of control, and now here she is, living with Minchul. She looks back at the paper. It's a contract for living together. Shocked, she throws it on the floor, but quickly accepts that they probably do need a contract. Each of them writes down 3 conditions. Minchul's rules are no smoking, don't bother mouse, and communicate if something is wrong. Jia's rules are, don't enter a room without knocking, don't force anything, and communicate if something is wrong. Jia is outraged by the no-smoking rule, noting that even her dad couldn't get her to quit. But Minchul explains that he doesn't like the smell, so he suggests she smoke in moderation. Confused, Jia asks, "Who's Mouse?" Minchul points to the cat currently lounging at Jia's feet. "That's Mouse," he explains, chuckling. He named the cat Mouse because cats like mice. Jia admits she likes the cat, but jokingly asks what would have happened if she didn't. Minchul, unfazed, says he would have just gotten another room for her to live in. After all, money wouldn't be an issue. He's serious about making the marriage work. They agree on the rest of the terms and officially sign the contract. Minchul adds one final clause. Either party can terminate the contract any time. Jia can't help but foreshadow that this contract will bring them both tears and laughter. On their first night living together, Jia decides not to unpack just yet, and instead orders some furniture. Minchul is set to return to work the next day, and Jia feels anxious about living with someone other than her family. Minchul, on the other hand, is calm and spends the evening gaming. The next morning, Jia is woken by the sound of Minchul cooking breakfast. Curious and a little impressed, she gets up to join him. However, her excitement fades quickly when she sees him blend chicken breast into a smoothie. Jia takes a sip and grimaces, finding it terrible. Hoping for something else, she asks if they're having anything more substantial. Minchul casually hands her a protein bar, which only frustrates Jia further. She complains, saying this isn't real food, and adds that he'll probably enjoy a delicious lunch at work without her. Minchul corrects her, proudly showing off his healthy lunch, which is just as bland as his breakfast. Jia opens the fridge, hoping to find something better, but it's stocked full of health food. At that moment, she develops a new appreciation for her mum's home-cooked meals. Sensing her frustration, Minchul suggests that Jia go out and get breakfast on her own. Jia, unsure, asks if he's fine with that, and Minchul reassures her that all he needs is his smoothie. Jia has been used to eating meals with her family, but she remembers that this is a contract marriage now. After Minchul leaves for work, Jia tells herself that she's going to get a job soon and promises to see him at dinner. But the moment the door closes behind him, she changes her mind and proudly declares, "I'm staying unemployed until my bank account is empty." Minchul is on his way to work when he gets into the car of his colleague, Sang-yu Choi. Surprised, Sang-yu asks why Minchul suddenly submitted a request for 10 days of vacation. He then notices something unusual. Minchul is smiling, which is rare for him. Curious, Sang-yu asks if something good happened. Minchul, remembering Jia saying goodbye to him that morning, replies, "It's nice knowing someone's waiting for you at home." Sang-yu is confused, so Minchul clarifies, "My wife is at home." Shocked, Sang-yu thinks Minchul is joking, but Minchul confirms that he got married last week. When they arrive at the office, word spreads quickly and everyone congratulates Minchul. He hands out souvenirs from his honeymoon, but before Sang-yu can start his day, their manager, Soo-yeon-so, pulls him aside, visibly upset. Soo-yeon, who had been quietly harboring feelings for Minchul, is irritated to hear about his marriage. She vents to Sang-yu, suggesting that she had liked Minchul. Sang-yu is surprised, noting that Minchul had never seemed interested in dating. The narrative then shifts to Soo-yeon's backstory, a 33-year-old who was once considered a child genius. She's climbed the ranks of success but remains single. Despite her achievements, she's always yearned for a moderately okay guy. As she reflects on her situation, it hits her. Minchul was that decent guy she'd been hoping for all along. Now that he's married, her dreams are shattered. Desperate for advice, Soo-yeon decides to consult with Sung-yu, who attended university with her and is known as the company Cupid, for his ability to navigate office relationships. After work, Sang-yu and Soo-yeon decide to follow Minchul home to see if he's really married. As they approach, they spot Minchul talking to a woman on the street. The woman is Jia, standing with an angry expression, smoking. Jia is upset because Minchul didn't call to let her know he'd be coming home late, and she had waited for him to eat dinner together. Sangyu and Suyeon, hiding around the corner, are skeptical that Jia is the type of woman Minchul would be interested in. Minchul, thinking back to breakfast, assumes Jia didn't want to eat with him because of his chicken breast smoothie, but Jia clarifies that the real issue is he didn't call her. Minchul, a bit confused, asks, "Am I allowed to call you now? You didn't like me calling in 5th grade when I asked if you wanted to play." Jia explains that back then she had to use the house phone and was embarrassed. But before they can get deeper into the conversation, Minchul notices Sangyu and Suyeon peeking from around the corner. He reassures Jia, "Okay, I'll call next time." Later that evening, Minchul has another chicken breast smoothie for dinner, much to Jia's dismay. As she watches him, Jia reflects on their past. She remembers how they used to be close, especially in their younger years, but that changed around 5th grade. Jia had stopped hanging out with Minchul because she was teased for being friends with a boy. She continued to avoid him throughout middle school, and now, looking at him, she feels guilty about being angry at him over something so small. Before she can apologize, Minchul surprises Jia by ordering her favorite food, spicy chicken feet. The gesture makes her soften, and she realizes that despite the awkwardness between them, Minchul still remembers the little things that make her happy. Jia suddenly barges into Minchul's room, ignoring the no-entry rule. Minchul immediately points it out, but Jia retorts, "There's a problem, and we need to talk it out to fix it." Reluctantly, Minchul agrees, and they sit down to have a conversation. Jia starts by complaining that Minchul didn't get her any beer to go with the spicy chicken feet. Then, getting to the point, she admits they've never really had a proper conversation, so she thought it might be a good time to talk while they eat. Jia offers Minchul a beer, but he declines without hesitation. Concerned, she asks if something's wrong, but Minchul explains that he's just avoiding beer to maintain his gains from working out. Instead of drinking beer, Minchul grabs a bottle of water and asks Jia what she really wanted to talk about. Flustered, Jia realizes she didn't actually have a plan, so she improvises. 2 hours later. Jia is drunk, rambling on about their childhood, reminiscing about how they used to play games together. Minchul listens, amused by her stories, while Jia fondly recalls their younger years. Despite the awkward start, their conversation brings back memories that bridge the gap between them, reminding Jia of the bond they once shared. Jia falls asleep, but Minchul abruptly wakes her up with the sound of an alarm. He tells her to go to her room and sleep while he cleans up. Still in a drunken haze, Jia realizes that she's tipsy from drinking the alcohol meant for 2 people. In her drunken state, Jia asks Minchul if she can see his ear. When he approaches, she playfully takes off his glasses and remarks on how bad his eyesight is. Minchul, a bit annoyed, asks for his glasses back, and to get them he gently pushes Jia against the wall. Jia is having fun until she suddenly notices how attractive Minchul looks without his glasses, and just how close they are to each other. Embarrassed by the sudden realization, she quickly hands the glasses back to him and runs to her room, feeling flustered and unsure of what to do next. The next morning, Jia watches Minchul leave for work, feeling the urge to apologize for what happened the night before, hoping they can return to normal. As she tries to say sorry, nervousness overtakes her, and instead she blurts out, "I'm Yao because the cat said meow." Minchul looks at her, completely confused. At work, Minchul asks Sungyu about Jia's strange meowing incident. Sungyu, thinking Minchul is joking or bragging, is taken aback, but Minchul is genuinely puzzled. Sungyu suggests that Jia was probably trying to be cute, but Minchul insists they aren't close enough to joke around like that. Sungyu, who supposedly has a doctorate in low biology, proposes a simple solution. Minchul should show Jia some sympathy. So, when Minchul gets home, he meows at Jia. Jia falls to the floor in embarrassment. Minchul casually says, "Sungyu said this would help." But Jia, already upset, snaps at him. She's angry that he shared their personal moment with others, especially since they added a clause to their contract about keeping things private between them. A few days later, Suyeon suggests Minchul host a housewarming party. When Minchil tells Jia, she's initially hesitant, but after some thought she agrees to go along with it. Minchil asks why she's willing to do it, and Jia explains that housewarming parties, typically held after moving into a new home or getting married, are a way to ask for continued support. While it's not required, it's a once-in-a-lifetime. Normally, it's something to avoid because of all the work involved, but Jia wants to do it because Minchil hates the idea. It's her way of getting back at him for embarrassing her the day before. The next day, after protesting with Jia about not needing a housewarming party, Minchi leaves for work with a smile. Jia has noticed a few key traits about him. 1. Minchio is all about efficiency, almost like an eco-friendly robot. 2. Minchil is weak to requests and will comply if pushed enough. Based on these traits, Jia assumes that Minchil will tell his co-workers that his wife didn't want a party. However, when she learns what Minchil refers to her as at work, she becomes embarrassed and starts to regret her decision. Despite this, she begins preparations for the housewarming, even though she doesn't know how to cook well, leading her to call her mother for help. As the guests begin to arrive, Jia whispers to Minchil that he should be nice to her during the gathering. The partygoers are amazed at the spread of food Jia has prepared, though Minchil clearly doesn't want to be there and starts drinking. Sungyu, one of the guests, asks Suyeon if she feels satisfied knowing Minchil is actually married, but Suyeon, unfazed, reveals she has something prepared to test them. Sungyu then proposes an activity where they all get to know Minchil better, explaining that everyone wrote down something they wanted to ask him. The first request comes from Suyeon, and to everyone's surprise, it is for Minchil and Jia to kiss. Jia is curious to hear the request, but Sungyu hesitates before reading it aloud, sensing the tension building. The next question comes up, and Jia, eager to avoid a headache, quietly tells Minchil they should just pretend to be a happy couple for the evening. The question is, when, where, and how did he propose? If they can't answer, they have to drink a whole glass of beer. Jia scrambles for a good fake response but can't come up with anything convincing. To her surprise, Minchil casually responds, "Jia proposed to me in a smoking area while I was eating chicken breast. This, to Jia's shock, is true." Unsure how to handle the truth coming out in such a casual setting, Jia chooses to stay quiet and drink. The next question follows. When and where was your first kiss? This presents a bigger problem. Jia and Minchil haven't kissed, not even at their wedding. Resigned, Jia prepares to drink again, but before she can, Minchil jumps in with another unexpected answer. "We kissed when we were 5. In kindergarten," he says confidently. Jia stares at him confused until he explains. "Your nickname back then was the smooching ghost because you went around kissing everyone." Jia turns red with embarrassment, angry that Minchil would bring up something so silly from her past. Eventually the party winds down and the guests leave, but not without suspicion. Sungyu and Suyeon agree that something about Minchil and Jia's interactions felt forced, almost too practiced. Sungyu, worried, asks Suyeon if they should dig deeper into the couple's relationship, but Suyeon surprises him by saying no. Sungyu is taken aback by her sudden shift and almost gets into an accident while driving. Suyeon reassures him. "It's okay. I didn't think I could force my way into their relationship anyway," she says with a mix of resignation and acceptance. Sungyu, still startled, suggests they go out for a drink to clear their heads, and they end up at a fancy barbecue place. The night blurs in a haze of alcohol and conversation, and suddenly the two wake up the next morning in the same bed, naked. Sungyu, shocked and confused, wonders aloud if this could be the beginning of something romantic, as the reality of what happened between them starts to sink in. Back in Jia and Minchil's apartment, Jia confronts Minchil about why talking about their kindergarten kiss and his proposal in a smoking area is so embarrassing for her. She thinks it's common sense to avoid such stories, but then she remembers she's dealing with Minchil, whose understanding of social cues can be a bit off. She sighs and suggests we should probably pick another time for our first kiss. Just as they start discussing it, Jia's phone rings. It's her mum, calling excitedly to tell her that Spaghetti Man Loses His Way just came out today. Spaghetti Man is a franchise that essentially launched the hero movie craze, and Jia's family is obsessed. "Did you already watch it?" Gia asks, half joking, and her mum immediately says yes. Before her mum can spoil any details, Gia cuts her off and quickly ends the call. Her family has a long-standing tradition where if you don't watch a movie the day it comes out, whoever sees it first gets to spoil it for everyone else. The competition is especially fierce for major releases like Spaghetti Man, so Gia knows they have to watch it immediately. "Mitchell, we need to watch it now," she declares, grabbing her coat. Later, at the movie theatre, Gia settles into her seat, happily munching on popcorn while Minchia seems unusually tense. Midway through the film, he quietly says, "This feels like a date." Gia is caught off guard by the comment and finds herself momentarily flustered, but she quickly focuses back on the movie. The movie turns out to be fantastic, but an awkward moment happens when Gia and Minchi both reach for the popcorn at the same time, their hands brushing against each other. They both pull back, a little embarrassed. Afterward, as they leave the theatre, Gia excitedly chats about the film, dissecting every detail. She suddenly realizes that the whole evening felt, well, like a date. Unbeknownst to her, Minchiul has been a Spaghetti Man fan for over 20 years, following the series from the beginning. He listens intently to Gia's thoughts but remains quiet about his own long-standing phantom, his mind more focused on the fact that this outing really did feel like a date, something that catches both of them by surprise. As Gia and Minchiul were leaving the theatre, Gia suddenly got pushed from behind by the crowd. Instinctively, Minchiul caught her in his arms. The abruptness of the moment caused them to accidentally kiss. Shocked, Minchiul quickly put her down. Flustered, Gia blurted out, "That didn't count, the 3-second rule," before running away in embarrassment. Minchiul found her a little later in the smoking area, where he made her air out her clothes. He stood beside her, confirming, "You're right, the kiss didn't count because of the 3-second rule." Gia nodded, trying to brush it off, but the tension between them lingered. They decided to go grab lunch together, but throughout the meal, Gia couldn't shake the image of the accidental kiss. She felt like she was overreacting, but before she could sort out her thoughts, Minchiul cleared his throat and said, "I need to get something off my chest." He paused, looking slightly uncomfortable, then admitted, "The kiss wasn't 3 seconds. It was 5. Gia stared at him in disbelief as he continued, "So, maybe we should count it as our first kiss?" He smiled, thinking he was being reasonable, but Gia's face flushed with anger. Without a word, she stood up and ran out of the restaurant, too overwhelmed to look at Minchi. Needing space, Gia decided to stay with her sister, Jaemin. When she arrived, Jaemin and her husband Gino were unimpressed by the situation. Jaemin sighed, while Gino shook his head, clearly used to Gia's dramatics. This was when the 1326 Honest Gia Summit began. A mental gathering of Gia from 6 different ages to help her navigate the crisis. Each version of Gia, arranging from her 5-year-old self to her present self, appeared in her mind's eye to discuss the situation. Present day, Gia explained what happened, admitting she thought Minchi's comment about the kiss was rude. 15-year-old Gia chimed in, suggesting she stay at a friend's place instead of running to her sister, but Gia quickly shot that down as not being possible. Meanwhile, 30-year-old Gia offered a more level-headed approach, telling her to consider Minchi's feelings instead of storming off. Regardless of the summit's deliberations, Gia's plan to stay with Jaemin worked because her sister owed her a favor. Gia had played a key role in bringing Jaemin and Gino together, giving them money for dates and convincing them to get married. This, of course, meant Gia was free to hide out at their place for as long as she needed, while she sorted out her feelings about Minjiul and the unexpected kiss. However, Jaemin is not as thrilled as Gia expected, despite Gia having helped her in the past. As they start talking, they note how Jaemin's children have adopted some of Gia's quirky habits. When Jaemin tries to spoil Spaghetti Man for Gia, she proudly reveals that she already watched it, much to Jaemin's disappointment. Jaemin then asks Gia what happened between her and Minchiul, quickly guessing that Gia ran away after a fight. Gia admits it, and with a smirk, Jaemin agrees to let Gia stay, but only if she babysits the kids so that she and Gino can have a night out. Gia isn't thrilled, but she doesn't have much of a choice. After 2 exhausting hours of watching over the kids, Gia realizes how tough parenting really is. Just as she's finally getting the kids settled, the doorbell rings. Assuming it's a delivery, she opens the door, only to find Minchel standing there. Startled, she slams the door shut, her heart racing. "What is he doing here?" she mutters to herself. One of the kids, munching on ice cream, innocently comments, "Aunt Jamin said if someone who looks like Minchely comes, we should let him in because he's food." Gia quickly realizes she's been set up. Reluctantly, Gia opens the door again and lets Minchel in. While the kids are distracted with their ice cream, Gia and Minchel sit down to talk. Minchel reveals that Jamin called him and told him Gia was staying at her place. Gia protests at the meddling, but Minchel calmly reminds her that, per their agreement, they need to talk things out when problems arise. He then asks, "Why are you mad, Gia?" She's momentarily at a loss, scooping up ice cream for the kids as she thinks it over. Minchel, who's turned down the ice cream himself, patiently waits. After a moment of reflection, Gia realizes that maybe it wasn't such a big deal. After all, they're both adults. By the time Jamin and Gino return, Gia and Minchel have made peace and they leave together, heading back to their apartment. Gia can't help but feel a little more settled, though she's still unsure about what their relationship is turning into. On their way back to the apartment, Minchel breaks the silence by apologizing. "I should have thought more about it and said sorry earlier," he admits. Gia eyes him skeptically. "You're only saying that because you think it's what I want to hear," she replies. She crosses her arms and then adds, "I think you should be punished," with a forehead flick. Minchie's eyes widen in alarm. "No, not a forehead flick," he protests, clearly distressed. "I have trauma from forehead flicking." Gia pauses, surprised by his reaction. "Forehead flick trauma?" she asks, but doesn't push for details. She sighs, placing her finger against his forehead, but before she flicks him, she admits, "I'm mad because I don't want my first kiss to be an accident." Instead of flicking him, Gia leans in and gently kisses him on the forehead. "This," she says softly, "is our first kiss." Michia stands frozen, unsure how to respond but also relieved. They continue walking in silence, a subtle shift in their dynamic hanging in the air. The next day at work, Minchu talks with Sungu, still thinking about Gia. "Gia's mad that people think our first kiss was back in kindergarten. I don't know how to fix that," he says, sounding concerned. Sungu bursts out laughing, causing heads to turn. "This is nothing to worry about," he shouts. "Trust me, you're overthinking it." He looks exhausted, rubbing his eyes. Minchil frowns. "But you all left the party laughing and smiling. Why are you so tired?" Sungu glances away, clearly avoiding the question. Before Minyol can press him further, Suyeon walks by. She's been avoiding eye contact with Sungu ever since the night they woke up in bed together. The tension is palpable. Suyeon, spotting Minyol's wave, panics and flees without a word. Songhyo, still flustered, clears his throat and reintroduces himself to Minchkil, as if they've never met. "I'm Songhyo, by the way," he says, suddenly very chatty. He starts bragging about having a doctorate in low biology, though Minchkil knows it's all a bluff. Songhyo in reality is an introvert who prefers staying home, but seems desperate to appear more outgoing in this moment. Minchia listens quietly, amused at Sunghyu's antics but unable to shake his own thoughts about Gia and how their relationship is evolving. Since Sunggu has 3 sisters, he's always been surrounded by conversations about relationships. This made him an expert at picking up on subtle clues from women, a skill that manifested early on. By the time he was a teenager, he'd earned the title of God of Dating, not because he had a girlfriend, but because he was able to match so many people together. Despite all this, Sunggu had never actually been in a relationship himself. After his unexpected entanglement with Suryan, Sungyu felt lost. Suryan had apologized right after, leaving him even more confused. He had first met Suryan in college. He was a freshman and she was a senior. Back then she was demanding and intimidating, but now she was just another adult, and it seemed like they both wanted to forget what had happened that night. Despite their decision, the awkwardness between them grew with every passing encounter, a reminder that neither of them had fully matured emotionally. One day they found themselves in the elevator together. The silence was thick, and Sunyu's heart pounded in his chest. Mustering some courage, he broke the silence and called out to Su-yen, but as soon as he opened his mouth, his courage faltered and he couldn't bring himself to say anything meaningful. Before he could gather his thoughts, a delivery man entered the elevator, breaking the moment. As the day wore on, Sungyu's thoughts were still consumed by Su-yen. He couldn't shake the feelings of confusion and regret. Min-jiel, noticing Sungyu's distracted demeanor, handed him a red ginseng stick and asked, "What's wrong?" Su-gyen hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. "Nothing's wrong," he lied, though his mind remained tangled in the mess of emotions surrounding Su-yen. Despite his expert knowledge of relationships from years of observation, when it came to his own feelings, Su-gyen was just as lost as anyone else. Sungyu suddenly has a profound realization. Min-jiel is married. Maybe he can help solve this problem. After some hesitation, Sungyu decides to ask for advice. "How do you break the awkwardness after a fight?" he asks, hoping for some concrete guidance. Min-jiel, momentarily thrown off, remembers that he's not supposed to talk much about his marriage to Jia. However, he also recalls that sometimes being flexible can help. He finally replies, "Our last fight. It was resolved when Jia kissed me." Sungyu's face falls. This wasn't the kind of advice he was looking for. He nods politely but walks away feeling more frustrated than ever. He gives out great relationship advice all the time, yet no one seems able to help him with his own problems. As he heads home after work, Sungyu's mind churns with annoyance. In desperation, he decides to call his second oldest sister, Yenju. Yenju is a successful romance novelist and influencer with a keen understanding of relationships, or at least the fictional ones she writes about. When Sungyu explains his problem, he tells her it's actually a friend's problem to save face. Yenju is quick to catch on, but she's willing to help, under one condition. "You get me 2 boxes of those macarons I love, and I'll give you advice," she says with a playful tone. Sunyu sighs but agrees. However, just as she's about to start giving advice, Yenju pauses and asks, "Wait, is this friend of yours named Choi by any chance?" Realizing that she's onto him, Sungyu panics and abruptly hangs up the phone. He groans in frustration, feeling even more stuck. But just as he's about to give up, he unexpectedly runs into Jia. Their conversation starts awkwardly, full of small talk, but it doesn't last long. Sensing the tension, Jia quickly says, "I have to go," and darts off, leaving Sungyu alone once again. He watches her leave, feeling like the universe is playing a cruel joke on him today. Sungyu pauses, staring at Jia, feeling like he recognizes her from somewhere. "Wait a second," he blurts out. "Are you flaming hot chicken feet?" Jia freezes, her eyes widening in shock. She quickly tries to play it cool, pretending not to know what he's talking about. I don't know what you mean," she stammers, but Sungyu isn't convinced. "You're Yenju's little brother, right?" he continues, ignoring her attempt to deflect. She's always talking about her friends and writers. She's written, "Is it hot because it's summer?" and "Why would I be a no for Miss No?" I even got her autograph once. I'm pretty sure you're flaming hot chicken feet. Her friend from back in college? Jia's heart sinks. She'd always kept her pen name a secret from most people, but here was Sungyu of all people piecing it together. Reluctantly, she sighs. "Okay, fine," she admits. "That's me." Back in college, Jia had chosen a practical major to get a stable job rather than pursuing her passion. She had barely gotten into university and struggled to enjoy the social aspects of it. With little to do, she often spent time at her friend's place, her friend being Yenju Choi. Yenju was shy and quiet, but what made her stand out was her love of writing novels. Jia had admired Yenju's writing and, out of sheer boredom, decided to try her hand at it too. To her surprise, within 3 months, Jia won an award and officially became a writer under the pen name Flaming Hot Chicken Feet. It was meant to be a joke name since she never expected to win. Yenju, however, seemed a little jealous. She debuted soon after Jia, but their relationship had become complicated because of it. Now Sungyu had caught on, and she had no choice but to face it. Jia agrees to go with him to a nearby cafe, hoping to steer the conversation away from her past. At the cafe, Sungyu lays out his problem, his complicated feelings for Suyen. Jia listens patiently, sipping her coffee, then asks, "Do you need someone to just listen to you, or someone to give you a push?" Sungyu looks at her, shocked. He hadn't expected such a direct question. Jia leans forward and continues. "It's pretty obvious to me that you're interested in her, but the real question is, what are you going to do about it?" Sungyu feels a wave of realization wash over him. Jia's words hit him harder than any advice he'd gotten so far. "I guess I haven't thought that far ahead," he admits quietly. Jia smiles knowingly. "Well, it's time to start thinking." After hearing Jia's advice, Sungyu leaves, muttering to himself, "Writers have no empathy, but I guess that was still useful." He walks away with a sense of determination and quickly decides to call Su-yan. When she answers, her voice is filled with surprise. "Sungyu?" she asks, puzzled. "Why are you calling so late?" "I just wanted to hear your voice," Sungyu replies nervously, but even as the words leave his mouth, he realizes that wasn't enough. "Actually, can I come over? I'm already outside." Suyin is caught off guard. "Outside? Right now?" She glances at the clock. It's late, and she's already taken off her makeup and gotten ready for bed. Flustered, she hesitates. I'm not ready for visitors," she admits, but ultimately she agrees. "Give me 30 minutes. True to her word, Suyin appears at the door half an hour later, dressed in an intricate outfit that seems a bit too elaborate for such a late-hour meeting. They head to the playground nearby and sit on the swings. As they sway gently back and forth, Sungli breaks the silence by handing her a box of macarons. "I got these for you. They're from that place with the long lines." Sulian's eyes widen in delight. "These are amazing," she says, impressed. "Thank you." She seems ready to leave, thinking this was the sole reason for his visit. But Sungyu stops her. "Wait, don't go yet. Let's stay here a bit longer," he pleads. "It's fun, isn't it?" Suyin frowns, sensing something deeper. "What's really going on, Sungyu?" Taking a deep breath, Sungyu musters up the courage to say what's been on his mind. "We need to talk about that day." Suyin's expression shifts. "We agreed to forget about it," she replies firmly, but her voice betrays her own lingering doubts. "I know," Sungyu says, his voice trembling slightly. "I tried, really, but I can't." Suyin looks at him, confusion evident in her eyes. "Why not? You're the expert, the relationship matchmaker. Why is this so hard for you?" Sungyu chuckles bitterly. "That's the thing. It was my first time. I've never done anything like that before." Suyin shakes her head in disbelief. "But you're supposed to be this relationship expert, right? The guy who knows everything about dating." He smiles sadly. "That's the image, sure, but it's not me." Silence falls between them, only the creaking of the swings filling the air. Sungyu takes one final breath and says, "If you really want me to forget about it, I will. But I just needed you to know how I felt." Suyin stares at him, her thoughts swirling, unsure of what to say next. The weight of the moment presses down on them both as they sit quietly, side by side, the swings slowly coming to a stop. Suyin sits silently for a moment, contemplating Sungyu's words. She knows she should say something, but how does one forget something so significant? I don't know how to tell you how to forget it," she admits, her voice tinged with frustration. I don't even want to forget it, Sungyu. The words hang between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. The silence stretches out before them, and Sungyu can feel the weight of the moment. Neither of them knows how to move forward, but neither can quite let go of what happened. Suddenly, the scene shifts. At Mitchell's house, Gia is lounging on the couch, nibbling on macarons. Mitchell, ever observant, looks at her and asks casually, "Did you gain weight?" Gia nearly chokes on her macarons, shocked at the unexpected comment. "What?" she exclaims, her eyes wide in disbelief. "No, I didn't." But Mitchell isn't talking about Gia. His gaze is directed at Mouse, who is waddling around the room looking unusually plump. Mouse apparently has been sneaking extra snacks. Gia tries to brush it off, suggesting that maybe the cold weather was causing Mouse to bulk up for hibernation. Mitchell nods in agreement and turns up the thermostat, not suspecting anything more. The next morning, as Mitchell heads off to work, Gia cheerfully tells him to have a great day. But Mitchell surprises her with a simple, "See you tonight." Gia, feeling a little uneasy, wonders if Mitchell has caught on to her secret habit of feeding Mouse extra snacks. Gia recalled how Mitchell's pet feeder dispenses a strict 3.3 ounces of food per day for Mouse, but Mouse had been crying for snacks, so Gia had given in, sneaking extra food. That's why Mouse had gained weight, and Gia had played it off by telling herself it was just a phase or the cold weather. But today, when she picked Mouse up, she could feel the difference. Mouse was heavier. It wasn't just Mouse, though. Gia had been ordering delivery constantly, indulging in comfort food after long days. She thought she'd been managing, but when she stepped on the scale this morning, the number startled her. It was much higher than she expected. The scale must be broken, she tried to convince herself. But when she bent down to tie her shoes, the sudden rip of fabric made her realize it wasn't just the scale that had changed. That evening, after some thought, Gia asks Mitchell, "Can you teach me how to work out?" Mitchell raises an eyebrow, looking surprised at the sudden request. Gia, now fully aware that something needed to change, knows this is the first step. She can't ignore the reality of it anymore. She needs to take charge of her health and make some adjustments, starting with a workout plan. Mitchell is absolutely thrilled when Gia asks him to teach her how to work out. He eagerly asks, "When can we start?" His enthusiasm is contagious, and he's already planning their next steps. He's known for being incredibly dedicated to his fitness routine, working out every day after work. But when Gia gives it a try, she quickly realizes how intense it is. After a few sets, her body feels like it's giving out, and she's left incapacitated. She still has legs to do, but she can barely move. In the midst of her exhaustion, Gia falls into a dream. She finds herself standing on a beach, staring out at the horizon as a giant asteroid hurtles toward Earth. "This is our last night," she says to Mitchell, her voice tinged with urgency. "What should we do to make it meaningful?" Mitchell, always the fitness enthusiast, looks at her with unwavering determination and says, "The answer is obvious. We work on legs." Gia laughs, but before she can respond, she wakes up from the dream, only to find herself sore and unable to move from the intense workout. Mitchell, ever excited that she wanted to get in shape, is concerned about how much she's struggling. He had no idea just how difficult it would be for her, but he's committed to helping her push through. Back at the gym, Gia is doing lunges while Mitchell cheers her on, his enthusiasm never waning. "You've got this, Gia," he encourages, but Gia is questioning her decision to start working out at all. At home, Mitchell is preparing vegetables for Gia's post-workout meal, suggesting she take a walk to recover. But Gia, frustrated, steps on the scale, only to find it hasn't changed. "I should have lost at least 6 pounds by now," she thinks, but the scale mocks her. Mitchell, ever the optimist, insists, "If you do a routine every day, you'll see improvements. 3 minutes a day, that's all it takes." He sets out a small but effective routine for her to follow, starting with a 60-second plank. Gia struggles immediately. The plank is harder than she thought, and doing 3 sets of it feels nearly impossible. After finishing the sets, Jia can only think, "I think I might have died." Her arms feel like jelly, and the soreness has set in deep. But through it all, she looks over at Mitchell, who's benching 350 pounds for reps without breaking a sweat. She's amazed at how strong he is, wondering how he makes it look so easy. It's clear that they have very different fitness levels, and for the first time, Jia realizes just how far she has to go. Her journey toward fitness might be tough, but with Mitchell by her side, she's determined to keep pushing forward, no matter how sore she gets. While at the gym, a girl approaches Mitchell and asks if he's a personal trainer. Mitchell looks at her, confused, but she continues, clearly hoping for help. She asks if he could show her how to use the machines. Mitchell, always kind and eager to help, agrees, and Jia watches, her stomach sinking. As Mitchell demonstrates the exercises, including squats, the girl is a bit too touchy, her hands lingering on him as she mimics his movements. Jia watches in silent frustration, unable to ignore how uncomfortable it makes her feel. When the girl trips in a cute, exaggerated manner and claims it's her first time working out, Jia can't help but roll her eyes. She's pretty sure it's not her first time at all. The girl then flirts with Mitchell, saying that he's totally her type, and asks if he wants to grab coffee after the session. Jia is shocked. She knows she's not supposed to get involved in Mitchell's interactions like this, but she can't hold back. "Mitchell!" she calls out, her voice a mix of surprise and frustration. Mitchell, unfazed by the flirtation, calmly responds, "I'm married," and then, to Jia's surprise, announces to the whole gym, "This is my wife, Jia." The gym falls silent. The girl, clearly embarrassed, flees the scene, her face flushed with humiliation. Jia stands there, stunned, a wave of heat rushing to her own cheeks. As they leave the gym, Jia can't contain her curiosity. "Does this kind of thing happen often?" she asks Mitchell, trying to keep her voice steady. Mitchell, clearly used to these kinds of situations, shrugs casually. "It happens sometimes, but I always decline," he explains. "I don't want to go to a cafe or a bar after a workout because there's nothing to eat." He pauses for a moment, then adds with a smirk, "But I would go if they served protein shakes." Jia can't help but laugh despite herself, but she's also relieved. Mitchell is completely unfazed by the attention and has no interest in anything other than his post-workout routine. 3 days later, Jia feels at ease, knowing nothing bad will happen. She's grateful that Mitchell is helping her, but she's also thinking about quitting because it's tough. On their way back, Jia notices Mitchell smiling. He tells her it's because he gets to work out with her, which makes it harder for Jia to quit. The next morning, Jia goes for a light jog to relieve her muscle aches. At the track, a hooded man approaches her and asks if she's Jia. Shocked, Jia tries to run away, but since they're both out of shape and the man has asthma, they eventually stop. The man hands her his business card, introducing himself as Yang Jukner, a former main producer. His business card has a ruler on it, but it's deliberately misprinted. Yang Jukner explains that it's a marketing tactic, which works, as Jia becomes curious about it. Yang Jukner asks if Jia is still writing. She finds the question insulting, and he quickly apologizes for whatever happened in the past. He gets a call for a meeting and, before leaving, suggests they should have dinner sometime. After he's gone, Jia crumples up the card and resumes jogging. Later, Jia returns home, where Mitchell seems concerned. At dinner, they're using fancy cutlery and candles, and Mitchell, wearing fancy clothes, is clearly uncomfortable. Jia explains she just wanted to mix things up since they eat the same thing every day, but now she feels bad for making him uncomfortable. After dinner, Jia is in her room, feeling anxious about how she keeps running into people from her past. Suddenly, Mitchell knocks on her door, dressed in a suit, and asks her for a dance. Jia tries to close the door, but Mitchell blocks it. Reluctantly, she concedes, and they sit on the sofa. Mitchell tells her that she was acting weird, so he wanted to cheer her up with a dance. Jia is confused, but Mitchell explains that it's something people do in movies. Jia finds it romantic and asks what kind of movies he's talking about. Mitchell responds, Bollywood movies. They dance all the time, even when they're sad or in the middle of gunfights. He continues, saying that doing something alone can feel weird, but when you do it together, it becomes fun. So they might as well make this weird setting enjoyable. Gia bursts into laughter, recalling that she had said something similar. Then she suggests an alternative. Instead of dancing, they go to a barbecue spot for pork belly and soju. Minyo comments that they could have gone somewhere fancy since they dressed up, but Gia points out that there's fire right in front of them. She explains that dressing up and going to a fancy restaurant is normal, but going to a barbecue spot in fancy clothes is much weirder and more fun. Suddenly inspired, Gia picks up some greens and tells Minchyo to say, "Ah." Minchyo protests, but Gia insists he plays along. When he finally obliges, he realizes too late that Gia hid peppers inside the greens, and his funny reaction makes them both laugh. Afterward, they head to a karaoke bar. Gia is having a blast. She never thought doing something considered weird could be this exciting. However, she ends up having so much fun that she feels embarrassed. Minchyo, on the other hand, remains unfazed, simply enjoying the moment. Gia thanks Minchyo for hanging out with her, but he looks confused. She tells him she'll repay him for the night and suggests they head home. However, before they leave, Minchyo grabs her hand and asks why she always has to have the last word. He says he has something to add, then gently places his hand under her chin, as if preparing to kiss her. In that moment, Gia is reminded of when she was 10 years old, watching a drama series. She had found kissing scenes embarrassing and once asked her mum why people kissed if it was so awkward. Her mum reassured her that it was normal, explaining that such moments often happen unexpectedly. Back then, Gia didn't understand, but now she does. She puckers her lips, ready for the kiss. But Minchyo has other plans. Instead of kissing her, he picks a loose thread from her shirt that had been bothering him. Gia, feeling frustrated and embarrassed, grabs him by the tie and kisses him. Minchyo is caught off guard, but Gia brushes it off, saying it was complimentary. She explains that she kissed him because she wanted to. Later, in the bathroom, Gia is mortified by what she did. Kissing Minchyo in public was impulsive, and the excuse she gave him felt ridiculous. Meanwhile, Minchyo is also in the bathroom, washing his face, seemingly as confused as Gia. She can't quite figure out why she kissed him in the first place. After recalling key moments from her marriage, Gia laughs and has a realization. In her dream, while she and Minchyo were kissing, several small doll-like figures appeared and stopped them, demanding they kiss properly. "For a real kiss, you have to stick your tongue in their mouth and move it around," they said. Gia remembers confirming that she had done that, and the figures demanded they kiss again. They complied, but then Gia suddenly woke up. Surprised by her strange dream about kissing Minyo, Gia walks to the bathroom, still groggy. When she opens the door, she finds Minyo just finishing his shower, looking incredibly attractive. Embarrassed, Gia quickly averts her eyes. Minyo, noticing her discomfort, asks if she's in a bad mood, but Gia brushes it off, saying she had a bad dream. As she tries to recover from the awkward moment, Gia remembers their dinner last night and suddenly slams her head on the table in embarrassment. Minchyo asks what's wrong, and she quickly lies, saying there was a mosquito on the table. Gia starts to believe she's experiencing the suspension bridge effect, the idea that feelings of excitement towards someone can intensify during moments of anxiety. She's been anxious every day, worried they might get caught and feeling the pressure from their workouts. She concludes that her feelings are just a misinterpretation brought on by stress. Minyo, sensing something is off, kneels down to her level and asks if she's feeling unwell. Gia, embarrassed by his closeness, insists she's fine. Minyo looks relieved but still wants to talk about what happened the night before. Before he can say anything, Gia quickly excuses herself and leaves the room. Later, at work, Sunyu notices Minchyo's mismatched socks and jokes that he must have had a hectic morning. Minchyo also remembers accidentally throwing away a full instant coffee packet instead of just the wrapper. As he sips his coffee, his mind drifts back to the kiss with Gia, and he finds himself unsure of what to do next. At the gym, Gia and Minchyo's interactions are noticeably awkward. Although it was just an accident, the kiss still bothers Jia. She tries to read Minchio, but he doesn't seem visibly affected by it, which only makes her feel more uneasy. After stretching, Minchio suggests they do the bench press. Jia feels uneasy, recalling a video she saw of someone getting crushed by the weight. She insists she shouldn't try it, but Minchio reassures her, saying that while accidents can happen, he has a lot of experience, so she'll probably be fine. As Jia lies down on the bench, still nervous, she jokes, "If I get crushed, I'm putting your name in my will. They'll be dead anyway." Minio laughs and adds 2 20-pound plates to the bar, telling her it's only £60 total and that she'll do great. Minchio lifts the bar and tells Jia to give it a shot. Hesitant, Jia grabs the bar, feeling embarrassed. As she lowers it with Minchio's help, her heart starts pounding, and she grows even more anxious, especially because of how close Minchio is to her. Trying to push through her discomfort, Jia focuses on the exercise and starts doing reps on her own, determined not to let her nerves get the better of her. After finishing the bench press, Jia feels like their relationship is still the same, despite the tension between them. Sweating, she takes off her tracksuit, but Minchio quickly puts it back on her. Confused, Jia asks why. Minchio tells her that she might catch a cold. Jia playfully responds, "I don't want a cold, but are you serious? A thin jacket won't stop a cold. If it could, everyone in the gym would be frozen." She notices Minchio looking away and teases, asking if he's bothered by her wearing something too thin. In response, Minchio suddenly takes off his shirt. Jia, startled, tries to stop him, but Minchio asks, "Does it bother you if I take mine off?" Jia avoids answering directly, but Minchio continues, admitting that it bothers him when she does it. He adjusts her jacket, making sure it's properly on. On their way back, Minchio remains silent. Jia recalls how he's always been this way. When they were kids and Jia hurt her leg, Minchio insisted on carrying her home, even though he was shorter than her at the time. What should have been a 20-minute walk took them 2 hours, but Minchio was happy to help. Back in the present, Minchio tells Jia she did a great job today and encourages her to keep it up tomorrow. Jia, feeling happy, grabs his hand. Minchio, confused, asks why. Jia smiles and says, "You've got a problem. You can let go now." Jia ponders how things might have turned out if they had taken a different path or made different choices. The scene then shifts to Yenju and Yangduk having dinner. During the meal, Yangduk casually mentions that he recently saw Jia. Yenju, curious but cautious, asks who Jia is. When Yangduk describes her and what she was doing, Yangju quickly changes the subject, suggesting they eat before their steak gets cold. Yangduk, sensing her discomfort, realizes that Yenju may not have fully gotten over whatever happened in the past. The scene shifts again, this time to Sungyu and Suyan, who are sitting on swings. Before Suyan can say anything meaningful, she gets embarrassed and suggests they talk another time. Sungyu, frustrated, asks if he's too much for her. Suyan reassures him that it's not that, but admits she's scared of changing their relationship. Sungyu is the only person she feels she can truly talk to, and she's worried about losing that. However, Sun-Ye isn't satisfied. He points out that Suyan was the one who crossed the line first, initiating things between them. Sun-Ye then declares that he likes her, leaving Suyan no choice but to agree to go out with him. Now that Sun-Yu and Suyan are officially dating, their dynamic has changed. The car ride with Minyo feels awkward, and at the office, Sun-Yu seems completely absorbed in his work. He even skips lunch with Suyan, leaving their interactions distant and tense. By the end of the day, they say goodbye with an air of discomfort between them. After work, Sungyu and Suin exchange texts, and this cycle repeats until Sungyu realizes that their relationship hasn't really changed. It feels the same as before. Suin has a similar realization. They need something to break the pattern. One day, Suin texts Sungyu first and asks, "Do you have a sack?" She quickly realizes her typo and tries to correct it, but once again misspells it, typing sack instead of se. Embarrassed, Suin is flustered. Sungyu, trying to make sense of the message, calls her. When Suyan picks up, he clarifies that she probably meant to ask if he had a second to talk, and reassures her that he does. His kindness has a big impact on Suyan, who is silent for a moment. Sung-yu, thinking he's messed up, is about to apologize when Suyan confirms that's what she meant. They make small talk, but Suyan still doesn't have the courage to open up, so she lets out a yawn. Sung-yu takes this moment to compliment her voice. Before Suyan can hang up, Sung-yu suggests they go on a date. Surprised but intrigued, Suyan agrees. Sung-yu, eager, suggests they meet up right away, despite it being 11:38 p.m. Suyan, irritated, reminds him that it's rude to ask her to meet without notice, especially when she isn't ready. They settle on a later date. On the day of the date, Suyan arrives wearing a trench coat, a hat, a mask, and sunglasses to avoid being recognized. They decide to go to the movies, joking about the odds of running into someone they know. Then, to their surprise, they run into Jia. The three exchange awkward greetings until Jian notices Suyan and pieces together that Suyan had asked her for advice before. Realizing he was successful, Jian congratulates Suyan. Suyan, feeling uneasy, isn't sure how to react. Jia teases them, saying it's funny they're going on a date in broad daylight. They all part ways, but as they leave, Suyan mentions to Sung-yu that she hadn't realized how close he and Jia were. Sung-yu seems taken aback by her comment. Sung-yu hugs Suyan, and just as the moment feels intimate, Mineo suddenly appears, holding a jar of Spaghetti Man-branded tomato sauce, which is limited to 1 per customer. He doesn't seem to notice them, and when he leaves, Sung-yu and Suyan awkwardly pull away, embarrassed by how close they were. Trying to cover up their flustered state, they both comment on how hot it is, though the heat is really from their embarrassment. They decide to cool off by getting cold noodles at a trending restaurant. However, when they arrive, they run into 2 more people from their office, making lunch uncomfortably awkward. Afterward, they head to karaoke to unwind, only to bump into yet another colleague. To top it off, the once famous cafe they planned to visit afterward turns out to be closed. As they finally grab ice cream, Sung-yu sighs and complains, "Why do we keep running into people from work?" Sung-yu notices that Suyan has a bit of ice cream on her cheek and, without thinking, wipes it off with his finger and licks it. Both of them are instantly embarrassed by the intimate gesture, but despite the awkwardness, Sung-yu feels happy about how the day has turned out. As the day comes to an end, neither of them wants to say goodbye, but they've done everything they planned and can't think of anything else to do. Sung-yu suggests they should head home and Suyan agrees. Suddenly, they find themselves standing in front of a motel, and Sung-yu is taken aback by its size. In his flustered state, Sung-yu grabs Suyen's hand and pulls her toward the building. To her surprise, they walk into an arcade, not the motel. Sung-yu, however, worries that Suyen might be disappointed that they didn't actually go into the motel. In reality, Suyen is embarrassed that her mind even wandered to such thoughts. Still unsure of what to do next, Sung-gu remembers that Suyan once wanted a fox plush from the claw machine. Suyan tries to deny it, but Sung-gu insists, reminding her that she spent $50 trying to win it the last time they were there. Determined, Sung-gu declares that this is his chance to make it up to her. He confidently approaches the machine, fully focused on getting the fox plush for Suyan. After spending $120 at the claw machine, the owner hands them a similar-looking fox plush. Sung-yu is frustrated, feeling like he's failed. They couldn't do any of the activities in peace, and the day turned out to be the worst date imaginable. When they arrive at Suyan's house, Sung-yu apologizes for the awful first date, but Suyan reassures him that she had fun. The cold noodles were delicious, trying to win the fox was fun, and avoiding people was exciting. Sung-yu, still embarrassed, insists that he'll get her a bigger fox on their next date. They part ways, and Sung-yu heads home to his parents, where he declares that he loves them. Meanwhile, Suyan places the fox next to a bunny plush Sung-yu had given her in the past. Feeling content. At Mitchell's house, they're watching Spaghetti Man on the sofa. Jia is sleeping on Mitchell's lap. Earlier in the day, Jia had received a call from her family, and just before they were about to watch Galaxy Wars, she was almost spoiled, so she and Mitchell decided to watch a different movie. Gia, being on a diet, ordered a Diet Coke with popcorn, but the movie turned out to be boring. Gia wasn't enjoying it and felt guilty for suggesting it, even though Minchil knew how bad it was. Later, back at the house, Gia decides she's going to watch a real movie. She tells Minchil he can do whatever he wants, but he sits on the sofa and watches with her. As they watch, Minchil munches on carrots and cucumbers. Gia finds it strange, but ends up mindlessly eating them too. They end up watching 3 movies in total. Now, back in the present, Gia wakes up from her nap on Minchil's lap, embarrassed. She quickly moves away and asks how long she had been asleep. Minchil casually replies, "About an hour." Gia, still worried, wonders if something happened while she was asleep. Gia asks Minchil if anything happened while she was asleep, but he starts talking about the events of the movie, not real life. Gia realizes that the only time Minchil has shown any emotion was when she asked him to work out. She comes to the conclusion that she's been dragging him into things without considering his feelings. Deciding to have a bit of fun, Gia lays down and pokes Minchil with her feet, casually stating that she has long legs. Minchil, confused, asks if there's a reason behind it. Gia admits there isn't, and in response, Minchil decides to give her a foot massage. Without a reason either. Gia is shocked by the gesture but doesn't mind. She laughs, telling him that it tickles. But Minchil continues, concerned about her muscles being tight. Gia starts to enjoy the moment, remembering that Minchil has always been good at things like back rubs. However, the moment is interrupted when Minchil presses her foot too hard, causing Gia to shoot up in surprise. Her face ends up right next to his, and for a brief second it seems like they are about to kiss. Before that can happen, Gia's foot cramps, and Minchil begins to meow in response. Gia is confused, but Minchil insists that the meowing is meant to scare away the cramp. Gia, now washing her face, reflects on how she's always the one feeling embarrassed. But what really stands out to her is that they almost kissed during the massage. Everything was aligning, and it seemed inevitable if not for the cramp. She remembers how Minchil didn't seem to oppose the idea and wonders if he might actually want it too. As she continues to process this, Gia suddenly tastes something bitter and assumes it's cucumber, but she never ate cucumber during the movie because she doesn't like it. Then it hits her. There's only one possibility. Minchil must have kissed her while she was asleep on his lap. Before Minchil leaves for work, Gia's mind is in turmoil, unsure of what really happened, or if she's just overthinking everything. The next day, Gia asks if nothing truly happened. Minchil says nothing happened, but when Gia presses about it, Minchil gets embarrassed and leaves. Gia now knows something occurred and decides to mess with Minchil for the next few days. However, Minchil starts avoiding Gia at all costs. Gia respects Minchil's privacy, but it's almost as if Minchil is deliberately avoiding all conversation with Gia. After a few days of this, Minchil even texts her saying he won't be going to the gym. Gia is shocked and starts typing a long message, but then Minchil calls her. She heads to a bar, and when Minchil arrives, he is asleep on the table, while Sungyu is crying beside him. Gia assumes they are both extremely drunk. Gia realizes that Minchi is red from drinking too much and that Sungyu was the source of the problem. When Gia confronts Sungyu, he reveals that Minchi was the one who wanted to drink. Sungyu also mentions that Minchi had been acting off for the last few days. Minchil, still drunk, starts making mistakes and asks if Gia and he had a fight during the taxi ride home. Gia ponders this question when Minchil drunkenly leans on her and asks if she's there. In that moment, Minchil tries to kiss Gia, but when she says no, he recalls that Gia once said, "It's up to the person who gives the kiss." Gia denies this, clarifying that she actually said it's a complimentary service, though it's practically the same thing. Despite her denial, the driver asks if they are newlyweds. Gia gets embarrassed and realizes they've been acting like a newlywed couple. The driver then comments that Gia's husband must really love her, which causes Gia to remember that Minchil is in fact her husband. When Gia remarks that Minchil is a thorn in her side, the driver asks if they had a fight. Gia decides they should go somewhere other than Minchil's apartment. Soon after, Minchil wakes up and they find themselves on a Ferris wheel. Gia had gotten all-access passes to an amusement park. Since there are barely any people there, they can use the pass to keep going around the Ferris wheel. Minchiel tries to get off, but Gia stops him. Gia asks Minchiel if he remembers passing out at the bar. She believes he was drinking because of her, and the contract says they need to talk things out. Gia had wanted to discuss it, but Minchiel kept avoiding her due to all the trouble she's been through. Minchiel owes it to her to stay on the Ferris wheel. As the Ajiar-Han pondered event begins, they start the first round of Truth or Dare. Minchiel is confused, so Gia explains the rules. You need to answer truthfully or face punishment, which is a forehead flick if you lie. The game ends if he lies. Minchiel doesn't want the forehead flick, which reminds Gia of the time she kissed his forehead. Still, Minchiel doesn't want to play, as Truth or Dare often makes a fool of the person. Gia reassures him that this won't happen because she won't lie due to an unpleasant memory related to Yanju. Gia provokes Minchiel, saying that this is his chance to ask her anything and even flick her if she lies. Minchiel agrees and asks who goes first. They play rock, paper, scissors, and Gia wins. Gia's first question is if Minchiel likes her. Minchiel gets embarrassed and doesn't answer. When the countdown runs out, Gia flicks his forehead. It's Minchiel's turn, and he asks if she likes him. Gia replies that she doesn't not like him, also feeling embarrassed. Minchiel is confused and tries to ask another question, but Gia stops him. Gia then asks her next question, saying that she could taste cucumbers after the movie even though she doesn't eat cucumbers. She also mentions that Minchiel started avoiding her after that night. Gia asks Minchiel if he did something while she was sleeping. Minchiel is speechless, so Gia continues by asking if he kissed her that night. She tells him there's no point in avoiding it because they're staying there until she gets an answer. Minchiel eventually admits he didn't kiss her. Gia ends the game, declaring that Minchiel is lying. He then confesses that he did kiss her that night, but not on the lips. He kissed her forehead. The reason she tasted cucumbers is that he put his finger on her lips. Minchiel explains that he was looking at her face while she was sleeping, and it just happened. Gia is confused about why they had so much trouble over a kiss when it was just a forehead kiss. Minchiel apologizes, but Gia feels disappointed, suggesting she wanted something more. Minchiel apologizes again, and Gia says he doesn't have to, but he insists on apologizing for what he's about to do. At that moment, fireworks go off, and Minchiel kisses Gia on the lips. Gia is shocked that Minchiel initiated the kiss, but the taste is bitter because he had eaten cucumbers at the bar. Gia pulls away because of the taste, and before she can ask anything, Minchiel passes out. Gia struggles to get Minchiel out of the Ferris wheel. They later refer to that night as the first great drinking apocalypse and add a rule to their contract: no kissing after eating cucumbers. The next day, as Minchiel leaves for work, he says he thought Gia would be more mad. Minchiel adds that since he can't kiss after eating cucumbers, it's probably for the best. Minchiel says he can't kiss her when he hasn't had cucumbers, and Gia demands he leave for work. At work, Minchiel apologizes to Sung-yu about the events of the previous night. Meanwhile, Gia is vacuuming when she gets a notification on her phone. Her stock portfolio has dropped significantly. Gia's devastated. Gia isn't a freelancer who has to work, she's a freelancer who doesn't need to work. The royalties and dividends from the stocks she owns are enough to pay the bills. She's quite loaded. Well, was loaded. Gia thinks her stock app is broken. Why else would the value be falling so much? She's lost 9.28%. Gia decides to wait it out, thinking that selling is for amateurs. Her stocks have gone down before, so it should be fine. Days later, her portfolio drops even further, down 18.18% to Minch. Minchiel notices her behavior and becomes concerned. Then there's news that a businessman is getting a divorce, so Gia decides to sell her stocks. The next morning, the stock goes up 12.3%. Gia is furious and starts cussing the businessman out. Gia then decides to go out and eat. She realizes that if she buys stocks when they're down, she's essentially getting a discount. She continues to sell her stocks low and buy high. Now at the gym, her stocks are worth less than her original investment. Mincheol asks if Jia's going to work out and she says yes. He also asks if she's been playing a game on her phone, since she's always looking at it. Jia lies to avoid worrying Minchi, saying she's been watching a show instead. Jia's investment drops even lower and she deletes the app because she can't stand to look at it. Later that day, there's a scandal with the businessman, causing the stock to plummet even further. She should have sold her stocks, but Jia rationalizes that if she never sells, she never actually loses any money. This is perfect logic for her. Then Mincheol appears, looking very concerned, and asks if Jia likes someone else. Jia is shocked and denies it. Mincheol explains that he saw a video about married couples which stated that if a spouse starts acting differently, they might have someone else. Jia is still confused until she realizes she's checked off all the boxes for suspicious behavior. Mincheol points out that she also lied at the gym when she said she was watching a show. He notes that Jia has a tendency to share interesting and funny things with others, but she didn't share the name of the show with him. Jia thinks Mincheol took it the wrong way, so she decides to tell him the truth. Mincheol is shocked when Jia admits she lost that much, but she tells him she just didn't want him to worry. Mincheol becomes concerned and asks if it's really okay that she lost all her savings and how she plans to manage living expenses. Jia says she'll just work for money, but deep down it's not fine. What hurts more than losing the money is the impression it left on Mincheol. Mincheol suggests that he could pick up more of the bills, but Jia stops him. She explains that they should take care of their own financial issues, which is why she didn't tell him about the losses at first. For Jia, this is a matter of pride. When she moved out, she promised herself that she would handle her own life. She's proud that she hasn't had to borrow money from anyone. Mincheol stands up and says that he trusts her, touching her ears. Jia gets embarrassed and smacks Mincheol on the forehead. Mincheol explains that he was simply giving Jia his energy by touching her ears. He adds that they used to do this in the past and they would yell energy and fusion while doing it. Jia smacks Mincheol again and storms off, angry that he would bring up something from the past. Once she leaves, she realizes that touching someone's ears is a very sensual thing. A week later, Jia is going to job interviews and Minch wishes her good luck before she leaves. Jia has always been lucky throughout her life, but now her struggle to get a job begins. As she crosses the road, a truck suddenly appears, and then the scene shifts to two birds reading a piece of paper. The paper says, "A long time ago in a small village there was an honest lumberjack and an angel who could not return to heaven because she lost her wings. One day, while the lumberjack is cutting down a tree, he hears the angel calling for him. The angel has found her robe while cleaning the house, and she's excited. But the lumberjack is horrified. The angel continues, saying that the robe had been hidden right under their noses, at the back of the closet. She rhetorically asks, who could have possibly put it there? The lumberjack hangs his head in shame. He's the one who hid the robe. He did it because angels can't fly back to heaven without it, so they're forced to live in the human world. The lumberjack thought he was clever by stealing it while the angel was taking a bath, but the angel knew about the lumberjack's scheme from the very beginning. She could have taken the robe out of the closet as soon as it was placed there, but she didn't, because the angel knows. She starts to tease the lumberjack, playfully suggesting that he hid the robe so she would be forced to live with him, but simple teasing is too much for the lumberjack to handle, and he admits it. He apologizes profusely, justifying it by saying it was all in the name of love. The angel is shocked that the lumberjack admitted it without protest. Instead of leaving, she has other plans. She tells him that if he does her one favor, he will be forgiven. The favor is that whenever they are together, the lumberjack can't wear his glasses. The lumberjack is shocked because he can't see without them. Then the angel accidentally drops his glasses into the water, meaning he can't use them anymore. She continues, calling the lumberjack clueless, saying that she's been dropping hints all along that she doesn't like his glasses. The angel tells the lumberjack that the robe is irrelevant to the situation, since she doesn't plan on going back to heaven anyway. As long as he gets rid of his glasses, she will stay with him. Then, the angel places her hands on the lumberjack's cheeks and slowly leans toward him, almost as if they are about to kiss. Just before their lips touch, the great mountain spirit suddenly emerges from the water with two pairs of glasses, asking which one belongs to the lumberjack. Suddenly, Jia screams neither of them and wakes up in a hospital bed. She realizes she didn't become an isekai protagonist and is flustered that it was all just a dream. She's confused about why she had such a strange dream. The story of the lumberjack and the angel ends with them starting a business selling sticky rice cakes to tigers. Jia calls her mother to inform her about the accident, but her mother is horrified. Jia reveals that it wasn't really an accident. Truck-kun stopped right in front of her and barely grazed her. She is unharmed, but she did faint, likely due to being tired from job hunting. The doctor tells Jia to inform her guardian about the accident, but her mother points out that Minchil is her guardian now and asks what he said about it. Jia is shocked. She thought her guardian was still her mother. Upon looking up the definition of guardian, Jia discovers that Minchil is her guardian now. Suddenly, Minchil appears next to Jia, covered in sweat, and asks if she is okay. Jia is confused as to why he's there, but Minchil explains that her mother called him. Then Minchil notices a man talking to the doctor in the distance and approaches him. He towers over the man and menacingly asks if he's the one who hurt his wife. Jia is shocked, having never seen Minchil make a face like that. Upon seeing Minchil, the man bows down and apologizes for what he's done. The doctor tells Minchil to calm down so they can discuss Jia's symptoms. When Jia hears this, she remembers that Minchil and she are now family. This means that Minchil is there whenever she needs him. Minchil confirms that Jia is okay, but instead of leaving, he continues to ask if she's really okay and wants to stay with her. Eventually, Minchil leaves to go back to work, but Jia wishes he could have stayed with her longer. Jia is now walking through the hospital, needing to focus on getting a job. Suddenly, she runs into Yenduk. Jia explains that she fainted because she almost got hit by a truck. Yenduk asks where Jia is going as he walks toward his sports car. Whenever Jia sees a sports car, she knows how much it costs and doesn't dare to walk near it. She's always wondered what type of people drive those kinds of cars, and now she knows. As they walk, Jia's hair blows in her face, and Yenduk starts coughing. He says, "Maybe I should have used one of my other cars." Jia's shocked and asks if he has another car. Yenduk reveals that he has several cars, but they're all rentals. Jia had thought he won the lottery, wondering how else he could afford them, but Yenduk says, "I already won the lottery." Jia is intrigued, but then Yenduk reveals that he hit the jackpot when he ran into Jia. Jia gets angry, frustrated by his cheap pickup lines, but Yenduk suddenly gets serious and asks, "Why are you dressed in a suit?" Jia says that she was on her way to an interview because she needs money. Yenduk is speechless. He points out that Jia made a lot of money from her days as an author and asks if she's already used it all up. Not wanting to reveal what really happened, Jia just says that a lot of things have happened recently and there isn't much left. Yenduk laughs, saying that Jia-han is willing to work a job to pay the bills. Before he can say anything else, Jia flips him off and tells him she isn't going to ride with him again. Yenduk points out that her reaction, without him saying anything, shows she has the writer's spirit. Yenduk then suggests that Jia work at a cafe. Jia is confused, but Yenduk explains that he knows a rich guy who runs one for fun and pays very well, even though there aren't many customers. Jia is baffled that something like that could exist, but Yenduk hands her his business card and tells Jia to call him if she's interested. He can get her an interview. As Jia walks home, she acknowledges that working at the cafe sounds like a good offer, but she doesn't want to owe Yenduk anything, as it would hurt her pride. Suddenly, she spots Minchil standing and looking at his phone. She deduces that he's been waiting there so they can walk home together. Jia feels a sense of gladness and starts running toward Minchil. She collides with him, and Minchil is shocked to see her there. Jia playfully asks Minchil questions about him being there. Minchil simply replies with a yes, and Jia teases him, asking if something is wrong with his head since he didn't elaborate. Then Jia suddenly realizes she's hugging Minchil in public and everyone is looking at them. She quickly backs away, but Minchil pulls her back into a hug and asks why she hasn't been answering his calls. Jia explains that her phone was on silent and that he was worried. Jia confirms that she's okay and tells him she wants to stop hugging because people are staring, but Minchil insists they continue for just a little longer. He's always so nice to Gia that she feels bad for making him worry. She knows she needs to put her pride aside to prevent him from stressing, so she declares that she got a job working at a cafe. That means she won't be jobless anymore and will be heading to work tomorrow. She suggests they go out and celebrate. Gia playfully asks if Minchi will risk losing all his gains by having a cheat day today, and Minchi agrees. Gia is glad to see Minchi not worrying anymore. His smile is so much better than when he's concerned. The next day, Gia arrives at the interview, and to her surprise, the owner is shocked that she's on time, but Gia is even more shocked to realize that the owner is none other than Yenduk. Gia was living a completely normal life, but then she rediscovered the importance of working. However, she didn't like any of the job offers she had received so far. That was until she got a call from her old boss, who was recruiting her for a job. Gia was suspicious of his offer, but she didn't realize Yenduk would trick her like this. As Gia tried to figure out what to do, Yenduk began reading off her resume. He noticed that Gia had dropped out of college, worked in a call center for 2 years, had a few part-time jobs, but no real work experience. Yenduk noticed Gia seemed distracted and asked what was wrong. Gia didn't know what to do since she hadn't spoken to Yenduk in years, but before she could respond, Yenduk interrupted her thoughts, assuring her not to worry. He wouldn't have interviewed Gia if he wasn't serious about hiring her. Yenduk never thought he would meet Gia again, but after looking over her resume, he said he had seen enough. Then he noticed that Gia was married. He took off his glasses to confirm what he had seen and, upon closer inspection, realized that Gia was indeed married. He was shocked. Gia recalled that Yenduk Choi was the one responsible for all the good memories in college. She also observed how her old hair color was the same as Yenduk's current hair color, wondering if that meant he hadn't moved on from the past. Yenduk had always made Gia think ambition was cool, even though she had no aspirations back then. Now, Yenduk had written dozens of novels, 3 of which were now TV shows, and he only continued to grow. After her debut, Yenduk didn't need luck like Gia did, but now she was Gia's boss. Yenduk laughed when she heard Gia was married, never imagining that the same girl who stayed up all night reading web novels in Yenduk's room would end up married. Gia revealed that her husband was her childhood friend, and Yenduk asked how they got married. Gia avoided the question, instead showing her pictures from her honeymoon. Yenduk was impressed. Gia thought their conversation might be awkward since they hadn't seen each other in years, but it was actually quite pleasant, as if they'd just seen each other yesterday. She remembered how Yenduk used to be awkward, but now, with vast sums of money, perhaps her confidence came from having enough to spare. It felt like there was a spotlight on Yenduk. Before Gia left, she asked if it was really okay to be working full-time at the cafe. Yenduk shrugged, saying it didn't matter since she was the owner and could do whatever she wanted. Gia's first day at the cafe was on Monday. Before her taxi left, Gia said it had been nice seeing Yenduk. Yenduk smiled and told Gia to get home safe. Gia arrived home and celebrated getting the job. Minchiel was concerned, but Gia reassured him. Meanwhile, Yenduk was at home, looking at an old picture of her and Gia. She smiled and whispered that she should be the one thanking Gia, implying she had been playing 4D chess the whole time, and this was all part of her master plan. Meanwhile, Gia and Minchia were blowing out candles on a cake to celebrate. It's Monday, and Gia is being introduced to the staff of Second Cafe. Yenju mentions that she and Gia went to college together before introducing the rest of the staff. First, she introduces Chuli, one of their top baristas, and tells Gia that if she ever has questions, he's the one to ask. Then, Yenju introduces Nariju, Nari. But Gia and Nari are shocked to recognize each other from a past encounter at the gym, where Nari had been trying to seduce Menchiel. Nari recently turned 25, and most people see her as narcissistic. She often boasts about her great style and good looks. She even wears earbuds without music so she can hear people compliment her appearance, and takes a route 10 minutes longer just to show off to passers-by. Nari also works at Second Cafe, which, on the surface, seems like a typical cafe, but in reality offers unmatched benefits. Since the previous manager left, Nari had been next in line for the role. If she became the manager, she'd feel like she finally had everything she ever wanted. But now, with Jia's arrival as the new manager, Nari's dream has been shattered. Furious, Nari complains to Yenju, arguing that she has been with the cafe longer and contributed more than Jia. She demands an explanation, especially since Jia doesn't have much experience in the industry. Yenju, unfazed, simply reminds Nari that she owns the cafe and can do whatever she wants, essentially telling Nari it's a skill issue. Nari is outraged, questioning how Jia can have a hot husband and be friends with a famous author. Before the tension escalates, Nari awkwardly apologizes to Jia for what happened at the gym. Jia brushes it off, saying it's in the past and doesn't matter anymore. Nari is taken aback by Jia's calm response and thinks it's kind of cool that Jia didn't get mad. Still, Nari believes Jia doesn't know the first thing about running a cafe and can't accept her as the manager. When Jia asks Nari for help, it catches her off guard, and her voice cracks as she awkwardly agrees. Jia asks about a recipe, and Nari quickly realizes she doesn't actually have to help. She decides to taunt Jia, saying it's embarrassing that a manager doesn't know something so basic, but Jia calmly replies that's exactly why she's asking, to learn and improve. Nari is shocked that Jia doesn't get flustered. Despite Nari's rude attitude, Jia keeps asking questions. Nari, to her surprise, starts noticing that Jia isn't bad-looking. Embarrassed, Nari tells Jia to ask Siuli for help and walks away, discreetly flipping her off in frustration. She thinks Jia is annoying. Soon after, an old man arrives and compliments Nari's appearance, which irritates her. He asks for her number, and when Nari tries to give him the store number instead, he gets angry, claiming that after spending so much money at the cafe, the least she could do is give him her personal number. Nari wishes Chuli or the boss were around to deal with this. Suddenly, Jia appears next to Nari and, to Nari's shock, suggests that Nari should give the man her number because the customer is always right. The man gets excited, feeling understood for the first time. Jia then introduces herself as the new manager. Nari is at a loss, unable to believe what Jia's doing. To her surprise, Jia writes something down on a piece of paper and hands it to the man, saying it's the number he wanted. When the man leaves, Nari realizes Jia gave him the store's number all along, but handled the situation confidently. The man is excited because all he wants is to take Nari for a drive and grab something to eat together. But when he looks at the number on the paper, his excitement turns to outrage. It's 911, the emergency number. The man is furious, but Jia, completely calm, insists that he go ahead and dial it. The entire cafe is now staring at them. To make things worse, Jia offers to dial it for him, which only infuriates the man more. The man pulls the classic, "Do you know who I am?" card, but Jia effortlessly flips the situation by replying, "Do you know who I am?" The man, suddenly subdued, quietly admits that he doesn't know her, and awkwardly wishes them a good day before leaving. As soon as he's gone, Jia sighs and comments that she almost let her true colours show back there. Nari, somewhat impressed, thanks Jia for her help and expresses concern that the situation might cause trouble with the boss or stir up rumours. But Jia, nonchalant, brushes it off, saying she'll deal with it when it happens and that there's no point worrying about something that hasn't even occurred yet. Even if it does, she promises to take full responsibility. Nari jokingly replies that as long as Jia takes full responsibility, it's fine. She's surprised. She never thought Jia was the type to step up like that, and she has to admit that Jia standing up for her was pretty awesome. But then, Nari quickly reminds herself that Jia is still her enemy. After all, Jia stole Menchiel and her chance at becoming manager, even though deep down, Nari knows Jia never really stole Menchiel in the first place. Suddenly, another customer enters the cafe and asks for one hot-iced Americano. Both Jia and Nari are speechless. It's villain number 2, the notorious hot ice lady. This lady has a reputation for chewing out the staff if they get her order wrong. She continues, saying she didn't expect the same qualità in Servidio as a cafe in Milan, but their lack of response is rude. Jia, looking frustrated but composed, repeats the order in the lady's strange accent. Then, without hesitation, Jia hands her a cup of ice and a hot Americano, letting the lady decide how much ice she wants. Surprisingly, the lady says Jia passes and leaves. Nari is shocked. That's all it took to satisfy her? Nari starts to notice that Jia does whatever she wants and seems to have fun doing it. Jia continues to handle things in her unique way, even confronting loud customers. When they complain, Jia dramatically tells them they're disturbing the peace and that legal action will be taken. She calls the boss, who refunds their money and orders them to leave, stating that lawyers will follow up with a lawsuit. Afterward, Jia asks for salt to cleanse the cafe. Observing Jia's quirky behavior, Nari realizes that Jia has a way of making everyone happy, which explains why people are drawn to her. As Nari watches, she notices Chuli staring at Jia. Alarmed, Nari quickly covers his eyes, determined not to let Jia take him away from her. Meanwhile, in a black car, Yanduk asks the hot ice lady how Jia did. The lady, slightly disappointed, says that Jia seems unsatisfied with working in a cafe. She then turns to Yanduk, asking why he's introducing Jia to her now. The lady is Yomana, the CEO of Yomi Entertainment. The cafe is now closed, and Jia is saying goodbye to Nari and Chuli. A lot happened today, but nothing too major. However, there's one last thing Jia needs to deal with. She suddenly calls out to a man with a box on his head, telling him to come out because she saw him hiding for a while. Minchi is shocked that Jia spotted him, thinking his perfect disguise of casual clothing and a box was foolproof. As they walk home together, Elle is still confused about how Jia recognized him, especially since he wore different clothes and had a box on his head. Jia acknowledges that he put in some effort and asks why he was at the cafe, since he doesn't drink coffee and the cafe is out of his way. Elle fumbles for an excuse and eventually says he's trying out a new workout routine, walking to the gym instead of running on the treadmill. Jia, amused, remarks that she thought he was there to pick her up and smirks at him. As they continue walking, Jia suddenly trips, but instead of hitting the ground, she finds herself in her bed, her face buried in a pillow. The conversation had been going well until she tripped and fell, and she swears she heard a crack from Elle's shoulder when he caught her. She remembers how he looked in pain at the gym and starts worrying that something might be wrong. Concerned, Jia goes to check on Elle. When she opens his door, she's greeted by the sight of him shirtless, and she quickly becomes flustered, backing away and awkwardly saying she's going for a walk. Elle, confused, watches as Jia then sits down in his gaming chair. Elle explains that he pulled his shoulder and back muscles when he caught her, and he was just about to apply some pain relief patches. Jia, still confused, asks how he's going to put them on if he can barely reach behind himself. Elle confidently insists he has a method. First, he lays the patches on the floor, then he rolls around on them until they stick to his body. Once he stands up, they should be properly applied. Jia can't help but laugh, thinking his approach is as quirky as ever. Bah, the patches aren't sticking properly. Jia sighs and offers to put them on Elle's back for him. Despite his insistence that he can handle it himself, Jia is already prepping another patch, telling him to be quiet. As she carefully inspects Elle's back, she realizes that not much has changed since they were kids, when they would always scratch each other's backs or apply ointment when it was out of reach. The only difference now is that Elle's back is much wider. Jia starts wondering what Elle eats to get such a broad back. As she thinks about it, she remembers she was on his back during their honeymoon, which makes her start to unconsciously touch his back. Minchki suddenly speaks up, calling out to Jia. Startled, she quickly stops and he asks why she's rubbing his back. Embarrassed, Jia struggles to explain and ends up blurting out that his back is incredibly attractive. Trying to save herself, she quickly adds, "Your shoulders are huge," and starts massaging them. Elle, now concerned, asks if she's okay, but Jia insists his shoulders feel like rocks. As she continues massaging his back, Jia can't help but feel that this situation could easily spiral into something awkward. Elle, without his glasses, glances at her and comments that her nails are digging into his back, causing him some pain. Flustered, Jia apologizes, realizing he isn't wearing his glasses, and tries to focus on giving a proper massage. She mentally scolds herself, acknowledging that she needs to get her mind out of the gutter. After all, It's just a massage. 10 minutes later, Gia's hands are aching from the effort. Minchie's back is massive and she wonders if stepping on his back like she used to do for her dad might have been more effective. Regardless, Minchia thanks Gia for the massage, mentioning that he feels much better and can move freely now. Gia is happy that Minchia is feeling good and starts to head back to her room to sleep. However, Minchia stops her, insisting on returning the favor with a shoulder massage. Gia tries to decline, claiming she doesn't have any knots, but Minchia doesn't let it go. Now sitting on the bed, Gia watches nervously as Minkyil prepares to give her a shoulder massage. He asks her to move her hair to the front, and when she does, he gently places his hands on her shoulders. Gia feels inexplicably nervous. Why am I so anxious, she wonders. It's clear Minkyil isn't feeling the same way. He's calm and focused. As his hands begin to knead her shoulders, Gia lets out a small sound which makes Minkyil pause, thinking she must be in pain. But the pain isn't in her shoulders. It's in her heart. Gia's heart is pounding so fast and loud that she's convinced Minchil can hear it. Even if he can't hear it, surely he can feel the vibrations through her body. But Minchil doesn't say anything. Is he pretending not to notice? She wonders. The massage continues until suddenly, Gia yelps in pain. Minchil's pressure is too much. It feels like her shoulders are going to rip off. Instinctively, Gia grabs Minchil's arm, digging her nails into his skin. In the commotion, Gia falls back onto the bed, and when she opens her eyes, Minchil is leaning over her, his glasses off. Gia's face flushes with embarrassment, and the angle they're in feels problematic. She grips the bedsheets tightly, bracing herself for whatever happens next. Wait, what underwear did I wear today? She panics, unable to remember. Then it hits her. She wore a matching set earlier to feel more confident at work. Flustered, Gia tries to shake off the moment, but her heart continues to race, and she wonders if Minchil feels the same tension in the air. Gia feels relieved for a moment, but then quickly becomes embarrassed. Why am I relieved my underwear isn't mismatched, she wonders. It's almost as if she's anticipating something more with Minchil, and that thought makes her flustered. Gia puckers her lips, waiting for Minchil to kiss her, but he just stays there, unmoving. After a long 10 seconds, she pushes him off, annoyed. Why didn't he make a move? Nothing seems to be going right for Gia today. She even messed up while trying to open a snack earlier. It wasn't a total failure, but right now, all she can think about is how sure she was that Minchil would kiss her. Maybe I was the only one expecting it. Gia blushes, feeling foolish for assuming. Both of them are unsure of what to do next. Minchil suddenly gets up and calls out to Gia, catching her attention. She asks, "What's up?" And he hesitates before saying, "It's not good for your back to crouch like that. You should push your chest out to keep your posture straight." Gia straightens her back, and Minchil gives her a thumbs up before heading to take a shower, despite just putting on the pain patches. Now alone, Gia lies down on the sofa, disappointed that Minchil didn't kiss her. She berates herself for falling into these kinds of expectations over and over again. Meanwhile, Minchil in the bathroom is just as frustrated. He slams his fist against the walls, looking completely drained. His gaze falls on a pink toothbrush, presumably Gia's, and he picks it up, lost in thought. Back in the living room, Gia looks at a picture from their honeymoon and reflects on how she and Minchia are often called a trickster couple, always surprising each other in unexpected ways. Suddenly, Minchia appears, startling her. He casually says, "I brushed my teeth," leaving Gia confused as to why that's relevant. Minchia then explains, "I had cucumbers with dinner, and I know you don't like the taste of cucumbers. That's why I didn't kiss you." Gia stares at him, processing the explanation, and can't help but feel a mixture of relief and exasperation. Mitchell asks if he can kiss Gia now, and when she says yes, he leans in and kisses her. After the first kiss, he takes off his glasses and continues, much to Gia's slight annoyance. She thinks he's always so strict about following the rules. Maybe he should be a bit more flexible. Just as that thought crosses her mind, Mitchell surprises her by placing his hand on her waist. Gia is momentarily shocked by the sudden boldness, At Jian Construction, Miss Emotion tells Miss Reason that Menial Construction is on strike again, which frustrates Miss Reason because there's a lot of work to be done. Suddenly, a giant machine appears, driven by Mr. Flexibility from Menial Construction. He cheerfully tells them to just keep working while using his machine to move dirt, leaving Miss Emotion and Miss Reason in awe of his solution. Back in reality, Gia is surprised by Mitchell's newfound flexibility. It's unexpected, and she's not sure how to react. She thinks that Mitchell needs to turn on the blinker before making such a move, but then acknowledges he did, just in his own way. Gia is impressed, but then reminds herself that Mitchell is still a guy, so maybe it was bound to happen. Still, she hadn't expected things to escalate so quickly today. Mitchell's hand slides up Gia's shirt slightly, inching closer to something more intimate. But just before things go further, a phone buzzes, breaking the moment. Both Gia and Mitchell freeze, unsure of what to do. Mitchell leans in for another kiss, but Gia stops him and tells him to answer the phone. Mitchell hesitates, but finally gets up to take the call, leaving Gia feeling flustered and embarrassed. Now alone, Gia tries to sleep but is consumed with thoughts. She questions why she told Mitchell to answer the phone. If she were drunk, she wouldn't have hesitated to go further, but she was sober, and that stopped her. She recalls the kisses, feeling embarrassed all over again, and begins punching her pillow in frustration. Have I come to like Mitchell this much? She wonders, uncertain of when her feelings started to change. Just as Gia begins to ponder the nature of their relationship, she's interrupted by a knock on the door. It's Mitchell, asking if he can come in. Gia is confused but lets Mitchell in. He's on his knees, looking nervous, which only adds to Gia's confusion. For a moment she wonders if he wants to continue what was interrupted earlier, but instead Mitchell awkwardly blurts out that his mum is coming over this weekend and asks if that's okay. Gia is completely taken aback. She tries to dodge the question by asking if he meant her mum, but Mitchell confirms that his own mother will be in town for business. Neither of them knows why she's visiting, and the atmosphere turns uncomfortable. Gia feels her anxiety rise. She's still awkward around Mitchell's mother. Memories of their school days flash in her mind. The bell rings at school and students rush out of the classrooms. It's the stormy period of puberty, when everything feels heightened, especially in middle school. Everyone wants to stand out, and even the lunch menu feels like torture. Gia and her friend are trying to climb the school wall to escape, protesting that the food they're served is worse than what prisoners of war get, and therefore a violation of the Geneva Convention. Her friend is worried they'll get caught, but Gia insists it's worth the risk. Then, just as they're halfway up the wall, a woman wielding a baguette catches them. The woman had already subdued another student trying to escape, and now she orders Gia and her friend down. The punishment is swift and severe. She smacks Gia and her friend's behinds with the baguette so hard they can barely stand. It's not violence, it's corporal punishment, as the woman in charge of discipline at Gia's school was none other than Mitchell's mother. Gia had thought back then that she might get off easier since it was Mitchell's mum, but she was wrong. In fact, she got punished even harder. Gia sighs, remembering how she had definitely deserved it back then, but now that same woman is her mother-in-law. The thought makes her uneasy. She tries to shake it off by watching baseball, commenting to herself about how it reminds her of the old days when things were simpler. Before she ever imagined she'd be dealing with Mitchell's mum again, but in such a different context. Mitchell is confused, not knowing that Gia used to play baseball. She confirms with a smirk that her position was always the ball, and Mitchell's mother was the batter. Suddenly, Mitchell's mum, whose name is Jizzy Jang, arrives and they get into the car. As they drive, Gia notices how healthy Mitchell's mother looks and wonders what she eats to stay so fit. Jizzy comments that she's happy Mitchell actually picked her up this time, even though she's always declined whenever he offers. Then, she asks if the idea to pick her up was Gia's, and Gia freezes for a second before realizing that yes, she is the daughter-in-law. Dia confirms, but she's unsure how to address Mitchell's mum, feeling the awkwardness of the situation. She texts Mitchell for help, but naturally he ignores her text, so Gia awkwardly turns to him and asks if he could look at his phone. Meanwhile, Jizzy raises an eyebrow and comments that she finds it strange how they still call each other by their names. Both Gia and Mitchell are suddenly terrified of what she might mean, and Gia nervously asks her to explain. Jizzy casually starts talking out loud, saying that ever since they discussed getting married, she's sensed some sort of incompatibility between them. Gia feels the tension rising. This could be a dangerous situation for both her and Mitchell. Jizzy goes on to say that they've seemed a bit awkward for a couple about to get married, and she's always been quick to pick up on little things. Especially when it comes to, she expresses her suspicion about how quickly they decided to marry, just an hour after Mitchell signed up for the dating service. However, Jizzy softens, admitting she might be reading too much into things, but points out that newlywed couples typically can't keep their hands off each other. And the fact that Gia and Mitchell don't even call each other by pet names is unusual. Gia, feeling the pressure, quickly tries to diffuse the situation. She claims that they only occasionally call each other by their names and then nervously adds, "Hey." Mitchell's mum stares at her for a moment, then waits for more, leaving the air thick with unspoken questions. Mitchell's mother looks confused when she hears Gia call him "hey" and quickly looks away in embarrassment. Before Jizzy can say anything else, Gia blurts out, "Babe," and urgently tells Mitchell to check his texts. She's mortified for calling him babe in front of his mum. Jizzy, with a knowing look, concludes that they probably call each other babe, and Mitchell, trying to lighten the situation, tells Gia to address his mum as ma'am. That doesn't help much either. They finally arrive at the apartment, and the first round of the visit begins, the home inspection. Mitchell's mum slides her finger across a surface, inspecting it closely. She then calls for Gia, and Gia braces herself, thinking this is going to turn into one of those soap opera scenes with a nagging mother-in-law. To her surprise, Mitchell's mum reveals that she saw a soap opera where the mother-in-law nags the daughter-in-law, and she thought it'd be fun to try it out. Gia, feeling relieved but also a bit annoyed by the joke, chuckles awkwardly. Jizzy then says that Gia should clean more because there's a lot of dust, but quickly adds, "Just kidding." She turns to Mitchell, asking where she can unpack. Round 1 ends with a defeat for Gia, but she takes it in stride. Round 2 is lunch, where Mitchell's mum comments that the food is okay, though a bit too sweet for her taste. Gia quickly apologizes, explaining that her mum made the dish and that she should have tasted it beforehand. Next time, she'll ask her mum to make it less sweet. What Mitchell's mum actually meant, however, is that it needs more rice to balance it out. She rates it 4 out of 5 stars thanks to Gia's mum. Round 2 was a close save. Round 3 is the clean-up and tea. Everyone drinks tea, except Mitchell, who sticks to his protein shake. The conversation is awkwardly silent. Mitchell and his mum aren't talkative, and Gia is too nervous to speak up. Gia starts to worry that Mitchell's mum isn't convinced their marriage is legitimate and feels the pressure mounting. Desperate to change the mood, Gia realizes she needs to distract her with something. Gia looks at Mitchell and gets an idea. She asks him if he ever washes his shirt, thinking Mitchell's mum will immediately get suspicious because she heard Gia use his name. To her surprise, Mitchell's mum is curious instead and remarks how Mitchell always wears that same red shirt. The spotlight shifts to Mitchell, who sheepishly reveals his wardrobe, which consists exclusively of the same red shirt. Gia can't help but laugh as Mitchell's mum joins forces with her to fix his wardrobe. This day would go down in history as the first surprising of the Red Devils, inspired by the 2002 World Cup. Everyone was cheering for South Korea, and the Red Devil shirts were flying off the shelves. Gia and Mitchell were caught up in the excitement, but Mitchell took it a step further. He ordered the shirts in bulk, convinced it was a good deal. Now they find themselves at a clothing store, with Mitchell being dragged through the doors by both Gia and his mum. An employee asks how she can assist them, and they explain that they need help with Mitchell. They head to the men's section, and Gia soon realizes that even if she gets rid of all the red shirts, Mitchell still has an alarming collection of checkered shirts. Gia makes it her mission to make sure Mitchell doesn't buy more of those, but things take an unexpected turn. Suddenly, Mitchell's mum is enchanted by the vast collection of checkered shirts. Gia understands now why Mitchell has so many. Checkered shirts are his mum's signature style. Mitchell's mum insists that he try them on, but Mitchell resists. She then turns to Gia and asks what colour she prefers. Gia, though not particularly fond of either shirt, replies that both are fine. It dawns on Gia that Mitchell's wardrobe issues go beyond just comfort. She thought being an engineer was the main reason for his choice of clothes, but now she realises that his mum's preference for checkered patterns is also a factor. Under pressure from his mum, Mitchell reluctantly agrees to try on the shirts. Gia doesn't understand why Mitchell's mum likes checkered patterns so much. Maybe it's because she needs some sort of grid for when she scratches her back. Despite Gia's disinterest, the store employee seems genuinely excited about the idea of Mitchell getting a checkered shirt, likely because she thinks it will encourage a sale. Curious, the employee asks what Mitchell does for work. When he answers, she comments that the clothes suit him well and even mentions the store's 3+3 event. Gia, however, isn't interested in the promotion. She picks out some clothes for Mitchell to try on. When he changes, the store employee is visibly impressed. Mitchell looks quite attractive. Gia's impressed too, but in a different way. She thinks this is just the bare minimum for Mitchell's wardrobe. It would be great if he dressed better, but right now, he looks drained. Suddenly, Mitchell's mum calls Gia daughter-in-law and comments that the outfits are too plain, suggesting he try the checkered shirts. The employee is stunned to hear that Gia is the daughter-in-law and quickly retreats behind the counter to take a phone call. Gia wonders why the employee isn't stepping in to help, but she suspects it's because the employee is trying to avoid any tension. Gia also thinks the employee might be interested in Mitchell and doesn't want to get involved now that she knows he's married. Mitchell's mum presses him, asking which option he prefers, but Mitchell masterfully avoids the question by claiming that all he cares about is comfort, and both options are comfortable. Gia acknowledges that avoiding an argument was the best move, and she thinks Mitchell has grown a little. However, she would have preferred it if he had taken her side. As they go to pay for the clothes, Mitchell whispers in Gia's ear that he actually liked the ones she chose better. Gia is shocked, and Mitchell quickly avoids her gaze. Gia feels a sense of relief, thinking that Mitchell said that to spare her feelings. But then she jokes that Mitchell won't get brownie points for complimenting her while she's pounding on his back. However, she quickly realises that Mitchell's mum saw everything. Mitchell's mum looks embarrassed and turns away, scolding them for being in a public space. Her reaction gives Gia an idea. Gia tells Mitchell that they need to make his mum less suspicious of their marriage and reveals her plan. When they meet back up with Mitchell's mum, Gia and Mitchell are both wearing matching couple shirts. Mitchell's mum coughs in disbelief, and Gia justifies it by saying they were on sale. Gia came up with this idea after remembering that her parents always showed affection toward each other in public. Whenever they did, Mitchell's mum got embarrassed, so Gia figures she can't handle romance. The plan seems foolproof. If they flirt excessively in front of her, Mitchell's mum will stop being suspicious. Gia starts by calling Mitchell's name in a cute way and asking him to walk slower. Mitchell is confused but complies, turning into a rooster in the process. The plan works. Mitchell's mum is too embarrassed to say anything. Later, they're at a dessert cafe, and Gia tells Mitchell to say "ah" as she holds a spoonful of dessert toward him. Mitchell insists he can feed himself, but Gia ignores him and puts the spoon in his mouth anyway. The plan isn't perfect, though. Acting all lovey-dovey too quickly could raise suspicion, so it's a gamble. While feeding Mitchell, some dessert gets on his cheek, and Gia wipes it off with her finger before eating it. Gia isn't giving Mitchell's mum a break from her insanity, but she realises that doing this alone won't be enough to clear the suspicions. She needs Mitchell to cooperate, and asks him to help do something couple-like. Mitchell attempts to feed Gia and calls her a little birdie, which shocks both Gia and Mitchell's mum. They continue this act until they get home. Mitchell's mum acknowledges that they seem very close and suggests she should leave to avoid intruding, but Gia insists that she stay a few nights. Mitchell's mum, however, is firm about leaving, meaning Gia's operation was a huge success. Just then, it starts raining, so Mitchell's mum has no choice but to stay the night. In the same room as Mitchell, Gia suggests she sleep on the floor, but Mitchell says no and insists they sleep together since they're married. Gia is embarrassed, but as they're getting into bed, Mitchell's mum peeks through the door and sees them. She immediately assumes they're about to partake in spicy relations and says she'll be back in the morning. Gia quickly confirms it's not like that. 15 minutes earlier, Gia and Mitchell were in another room when Mitchell's mum asked why there was a bed in a room that wasn't Mitchell's. Gia gets nervous, knowing they actually sleep in separate beds, but before she can come up with an excuse, Mitchell steps in. He explains that he sleep talks and moves around a lot while sleeping, which made Gia uncomfortable, so he bought her a bed a few days ago so she could sleep well. Gia is impressed by Mitchell taking the initiative and giving such a sensible answer for once. She never would have thought the dense musclehead gamer, who only cares about not losing his gains, could be so sensible. Mitchell's mum seems somewhat convinced, until she points out that the bed looks well used, which seems like a contradiction. She then asks if they bought it second-hand. Gia and Mitchell are shocked as they return to the present. Gia is still worried that Mitchell's mum caught on to their scheme, despite them sharing a room. However, Mitchell's mum mentions she read something interesting recently and asks if they've heard of a show called Widow Couple. She says she'll send it to them later, wishes them good night, and leaves the room. Now, alone, Gia and Mitchell decide to sleep together for the first time. Mitchell suggests leaving now that his mum is gone, but Gia knows they must stay in the same bed to avoid suspicion. Mitchell proposes they sleep in opposite directions to maximize their space and comfort, but Gia doesn't like the idea. They settle on sleeping in the same direction, back to back. It's awkward, but it looks more like a real couple situation in case Mitchell's mum walks in. As they lay there, Gia can feel everything Mitchell does. His heartbeat, his breathing. Because of their position, it's embarrassing. Suddenly she notices Mitchell shaking, with his hand in a weird position, and asks if he's unwell. He assures her that he's not sick, but because of his jacked shoulders, his head doesn't align with the pillow when he sleeps on his side. He says it's fine though, as he'll get used to it. Then Mitchell apologizes for speaking up when his mum asked about the bed. To his surprise, Gia says he did well because her mind went blank during that situation. Gia is glad and tells Mitchell to lie down on his back to get comfortable. He's confused, but she then rests her head on his arm. By doing this, they both can be more comfortable and save space. Gia is now bored and decides to quiz Mitchell. She says she wants something from him and asks him to guess, all the while repeatedly touching his chest. Mitchell asks if he can take a guess, but Gia says no, offering him 3 points if he gets it right. Mitchell thinks he has it figured out and says, "You want a savings account with 1 billion won? Clean money, so you don't have to call Saul Goodman to launder it." The answer is tempting, but Gia says it's wrong. Mitchell is confused, so she gives him a hint. It's something he can give her right now. Mitchell guesses, "Is it chicken feet?" Gia shakes her head and he tries again, asking, "Menchoko?" Gia jokingly threatens to murder him. Frustrated, she says Mitchell is pretending to be stupid. Suddenly, Mitchell's arms wrap around Gia and she panics. He's now hugging her, and Gia is both embarrassed and shocked. She asks why he's doing this, and Mitchell responds, asking if this is what she wanted from the start. Gia, too embarrassed to answer, hesitates, and Mitchell keeps asking until she finally admits he's right and holds on to him. Mitchell is glad, but Gia is still unsure of what to make of the situation. She originally planned to tease him for fun, but his reaction was far different than she expected. Then Mitchell looks at Gia and gently touches her ear. Gia is shocked and doesn't know why he's doing this. She starts to get concerned that Mitchell might want to engage in something loud and spicy, and she doesn't know what to do, especially with Mitchell's mum just in the next room. Gia thinks things are moving too fast until she realizes that Mitchell has placed a plug in her ear. Mitchell did this so Gia could sleep peacefully, but Gia is confused about what he means by this. Mitchell explains that Gia is scared of lightning, but Gia doesn't see how that's relevant and denies it. Mitchell is puzzled because Gia flinches every time there's lightning, especially when it rains. Gia, however, thinks she reacts this way because of Mitchell's actions. Mitchell presses on, asking if she isn't scared, then why did she agree that Mitchell was right when he hugged her? After a moment of thought, Gia feels embarrassed because she realizes it was actually Mincheol's hug that comforted her. She admits, burying her head into Mitchell's chest, that she is terrified of lightning. Mincheol, upon hearing this, smiles, thinking his guess was right, and wishes Gia good night after putting on his sleeping mask. Gia reflects on Mincheol's behavior, finding him sly like a fox. He can be dense at times, but also seems to do what Gia subconsciously wants, making it impossible for her to predict his actions. A little later, Gia realizes that Mincheol is just really dense. He's asleep, giving her a tight bear hug, and Gia feels trapped. She tries to escape, but Mincheol's strength, even in his sleep, is too much for her to handle. Moving the wrong way would be impossible without feeling overwhelmed by his hold. Gia calls out to him to wake up, but he continues hugging her tightly. The next morning, Mitchell's mum is drinking something when she notices Mouse, Mitchell's cat, trying to sneak into a room. After she lets the cat in, Mitchell's mum looks inside and sees Mincheol and Gia peacefully sleeping in unorthodox positions, both uncovered by sheets. She quietly leaves the room, not disturbing them. Later in the morning, Gia wakes up and stares down the meal Mitchell's mum made. Rice with various side dishes. Just looking at the spread makes Gia's stomach feel uneasy. She realizes this is bad. She didn't get enough sleep. As they start eating, Gia thinks the scene could be straight out of a morning drama. She anticipates being scolded, maybe even slapped with kimchi, though she figures Mitchell's mum probably won't go that far. Noticing that Gia isn't eating, Mitchell's mum asks if something's wrong and wonders if the food isn't to Gia's liking. Gia says she's fine, though she worries that if she doesn't eat, it'll upset her stomach. Mitchell comments on Gia's red eyes and asks if she's not sleeping well. Gia responds that it's due to Mitchell's terrible sleeping habits. Suddenly, Mitchell's mum asks Gia if she has time to talk one-on-one after they eat. Gia is shocked and uncertain about what Mitchell's mum wants to say. As they walk outside, Gia tries to figure out why she's been summoned. She wonders if they acted too much like a lovey-dovey couple, and maybe Mitchell's mum sensed something and caught her acting. Mitchell's mum stops and hands Gia an envelope. Gia is confused, but Mitchell's mum clarifies that it's money, similar to what mother-in-laws do for daughter-in-laws in dramas. She tells Gia to do something with Mitchell and that she'll give her more if she needs it. Gia immediately thinks this might be about a divorce, though it's not entirely clear. Gia asks if Mitchell's mum is joking and tries to back out of the situation. Mitchell's mum laughs and says she was kidding. Gia is still confused, and Mitchell's mum explains she just wanted to lighten the mood because Gia seemed tense. Gia finds it hard to tell when Mitchell's mum is joking, and she's completely confused about what's inside the envelope. Mitchell's mum tells her to take a look, and, to Gia's shock, it's their marriage contract. Mitchell's mum explains that she wasn't specifically looking for it. She couldn't sleep, thought she'd just give them some pocket money and planned to leave, but then she got curious and wanted to see their wedding photos. While searching for them, she found the contract. She then asks Gia if she and Mincheol have a sham marriage. Gia is taken aback, realizing their operation has been compromised. She quickly tries to cover it up by saying it's not what it looks like, a typical move that only confirms the obvious. Gia knows their execution was sloppy. They should have hidden it somewhere more secure than behind their wedding photos. Unsure of what to do, Gia thinks she's screwed, but then Mincheol's mum surprises her by saying it's fine because she knew about it from the start. Gia's confused, and Mincheol's mum continues, explaining that from her perspective, it made sense. Mincheol had come home on New Year's, and she'd signed him up for a marriage matchmaker. Only 2 hours later, Mincheol brought over a girl he had decided to marry, and the girl just happened to be Gia, someone Mincheol had known his entire life. Of course, it was suspicious, but Mincheol's mum was glad that he married Gia because, deep down, she had always wished for this outcome. She told Gia to take good care of Mincheol and said she would cheer them on. Gia was confused because she thought Mitchell's mum would try to break them up, now that she knew their marriage was a sham. But Mitchell's mum didn't see any point in breaking up a perfectly functioning couple. If Gia and Mincheol wanted to split, that was up to them to figure out, since they were adults. Gia hadn't realized this until now. Mitchell's mum had been concerned about their relationship before visiting, but after seeing them together, she was relieved to see that they were both happy. She was also comforted to see that Gia was the same person she'd known a long time ago. Gia was taken aback by this. Later, as Mitchell's mum rode in a taxi, she commented that dealing with her must have been tiring. Gia quickly denied this. Before leaving, Mitchell's mum said that she hoped their firstborn would be a daughter. Gia was embarrassed, and Mitchell's mum left. Despite being a fake couple, Gia and Mitchell had survived the visit from Mitchell's mum. They even got pocket money, which made it seem like they had scammed her. Regardless, Gia and Mitchell complimented each other on how well they had handled it. Suddenly, Mitchell asked if he could ask Gia something. Gia didn't respond. But Mitchell asked the question anyway. He wanted to know if his mother had said anything weird. As Gia pondered this, she recalled how she had told Mitchell's mum that their marriage wasn't loveless because she had fallen for Mitchell. Mitchell's mum thought their relationship was just an act, but Gia insisted it was real. Instead of answering Mitchell's question directly, she started vigorously pounding on his back, realizing that something needed to be done about the situation. Gia asked Mitchell if they should start dating for real. Mitchell was confused, so Gia attempted to justify her suggestion, explaining that to avoid situations like this, where they had to pretend to be a lovey-dovey couple, they should just become a real couple. Suddenly, Mitchell grabbed Gia's hand and said he was fine with becoming a real couple, but the reason he wanted to wasn't for the same reason Gia suggested. He then pinned her to the wall and confessed that he liked her and wanted them to start dating. Gia was taken aback and asked if Mitchell liked her romantically. Mitchell nodded to confirm it. Gia asked when he started feeling this way, and Mitchell replied, "Not since when, even now," implying that he probably had feelings for her for a long time. Gia was still confused, but Mitchell simply repeated that he liked her. Gia looked away, embarrassed, and then said that if Mitchell really liked her, then if he kissed her in the next 5 seconds, she would decide how to move forward. Mitchell was shocked and concerned about doing this in public. Gia, feeling embarrassed, pointed out that Mitchell had already slammed her against the wall and held her hands, so it wouldn't make a difference if he kissed her now. She then began counting down from 5. Mitchell leaned in to kiss her, but just before he could, a woman entered the elevator they were in. Startled, both Mitchell and Gia quickly separated. The woman was confused, but then realized what had been going on and started to leave the elevator. Gia stopped her, saying it wasn't what it looked like, though of course it was exactly what it looked like. The woman began to sweat profusely due to the awkward tension in the air. The elevator seemed to be moving incredibly slowly. Gia tried to calm herself down, reflecting on what had just happened. What she had done felt too fast and her judgment seemed off today. Suddenly, Mitchell tapped Gia on the shoulder and motioned for her to look at her phone. Mitchell had texted her, asking if it was okay for him to kiss her 5 seconds from now, since they had been interrupted. Gia was shocked and asked Mitchell if he was crazy, especially since there was someone right in front of them. Without warning, Mitchell grabbed Gia's shoulder with one hand and swiftly pulled her toward him. Meanwhile, Mitchell's mum was in a car, flipping through a book containing a photo of Gia and Mitchell sleeping together as kids. In the picture, they were in the same position they had been sleeping in last night. She thought it would be nice if they were more honest with each other. Mitchell pulled Gia in and kissed her aggressively. After they separated, Gia quickly pulled herself back in and kissed him even more intensely. Her kiss knocked Mitchell's glasses askew, and after he adjusted them, they continued kissing. With that, Mitchell and Gia were officially a couple. The woman in the elevator with them was disgusted and decided to pretend she hadn't seen anything. Back in their primary school days, there had been a doodle drawn on the board suggesting that Gia and Mitchell were in love with each other. 20 years later, that doodle had become a reality. They were now in love with each other. Later at the cafe, Nari asks if Gia has seen a dermatologist recently because her skin is glowing. Gia happily responds, teasing that Nari won't get anything out of complimenting her. But Nari wasn't actually complimenting her, she just wanted to know which place Gia had gone to. Then Nari realizes that it might not be Gia's skin but rather her expression that has changed, and suggests that Gia might have engaged in intense adult activities with Minchil. Gia gets embarrassed and tells Nari to focus on her job. In response, Nari clings to Gia for protection, commenting that the more Gia denies it, the more true it seems. Gia didn't realize her expression had changed so much, but she assumes it's because Minchil has been bringing her gifts after work. Having someone think about her and share their happiness with her has been the best feeling. However, every day after work, Minchil continues to bring home large amounts of food as gifts. Gia accepts them but is not impressed. It's just too much food. Even Mouse agrees that it's too much. Gia knows Minchil enjoys bringing her gifts, but she doesn't want to kill his vibe since he's doing it out of love for her. One day, Gia spots a scale in the distance. When she steps on it, a beam of light shines from the apartment, indicating that she's gained weight. Minchil is now banned from bringing food home from work. He's confused, but Gia explains that if he keeps bringing her food, she'll gain more weight. She then corrects herself, admitting that she's already gained some weight. Mitchell comments that the food has 0 calories if you enjoy it, but the truth is, he hasn't even eaten any of it himself. He's been too busy trying to maintain his gains by eating chicken breast. Gia, amused, suggests that Minchil get her something other than food if he's going to continue with the gifts. Minchil points out that Gia once said she prefers consumable items over novelty ones, and Gia is shocked that he remembered. However, Minchil concedes and says he will get something else, like flowers. Gia is fine with this, as long as it's not too often. The next day, Minchil returns from work with a massive array of flowers, and Gia is taken aback. Technically, Minchil did exactly what Gia had suggested. He brought flowers. Minchil asks her what's wrong, and Gia asks why he bought such a large amount. Minchil justifies it by saying Gia said flowers were okay, and since bigger is better, he went all out. He also mentions that he noticed they were on sale, but Gia tells him the price isn't the problem, it's the scale of the gift. Gia sits down and tells Minchil that his gifts are becoming a burden. Minchil is confused, so Gia explains that it got annoying after the first 2 times. While she's grateful for the gifts, they're just too much, and make her question if she got into a relationship just to receive presents. Mitchell understands and apologizes, but Gia quickly reassures him that he doesn't need to apologize. She then asks why he bought so many gifts in the first place. Mitchell answers that he did it to make her happy, and Gia points out that's exactly the problem. She doesn't want gifts, she wants Minchil himself. Before she can finish her sentence, Gia gets embarrassed and walks away, saying that buying gifts is banned. However, Minchil grabs her arm and insists she finish her sentence. Gia clarifies that there are other ways for him to make her happy besides buying gifts. Minchiel, looking a little mischievous, asks what those ways are. Gia is confused, but Minchiel clarifies that since she said she wanted something other than gifts, he wants to know exactly what that is. With a seductive smile, he grabs Gia's hand and says that he needs to know this crucial information, so he doesn't make the same mistake again. Gia and Minchiel stare at each other blankly for a moment, and then Gia grins, saying that Minchiel is amazing. Minchiel, still confused, asks what she means. Gia gets a little angry, saying that Minchiel is pretending not to understand and using it to mess with her. She then takes his glasses off his face and puts them on her own, teasing him for acting so high and mighty. Minchiel is still confused and asks Gia to clarify. He wonders if he did something wrong, and Gia assures him that he didn't, while putting his glasses back on his face. As she walks away, she says that she's actually complimenting him and gives him an 80/100 for today, which means he needs to try harder next time. Minchil is confused about what geopoints are, and Gia stops in her tracks, shocked that she has to explain such a simple concept to a higher life form like him. Gia explains that geopoints are a rating system for how close she was to falling for Minchil a second time. After answering, Gia tells Minchil that he doesn't need to overthink it, he should just act naturally. This makes Gia feel satisfied, and she heads into her room to go to bed, leaving Minchil speechless on the couch. Minchil, still processing everything, starts to intensely study his hand, recalling the moment when they held hands. He questions what his usual self really is. On the other side of the door, Jia leans against it, embarrassed by the speech she just made. She had tried to act tough but couldn't be honest with herself. She realizes she wasn't acting naturally, even though she had told Minchiel to. Jia reflects on how Minchiel is a fool. If he had pushed a little harder, things might have gotten spicy. Suddenly, Minchiel opens the door without knocking, accidentally knocking Jia to the floor. He walks in with a serious expression, explaining that he's thought about it and finally understands what Jia meant by acting like his usual self. He then asks her if she was referring to the thing they do that has the letters X. Jia is confused for a moment until she realizes that Minchiel is talking about their intimate moments. She recognizes her mistake in giving him space and decides she needs to regain control of the situation. Naturally, Jia looks away from Minchiel and, trying to appear nonchalant, says that he can do whatever he wants. Minchiel is confused by Jia's reaction, but Jia decides to just accept it and worry about it later. Minchiel then suggests they head to their destination now. Suddenly, they are at the gym, where Jia is squatting and Minchiel is cheering her on. Jia realizes that Minchiel was referring to exercising all along. Exercise is technically his usual self, so this shouldn't be surprising. However, Jia struggles because she's been slacking off due to work. On their way home, Jia is riding on Minchiel's back because she overdid it on leg day. Despite the exhaustion, Jia is happy and doesn't regret dating Minchiel. The next day, Suyeon is walking down the street, enjoying a choco taco, when she sees Senyu with another woman clinging to his arm. Suyeon freezes at the sight, and a panic attack hits her so hard that she drops her choco taco. Later, Suyeon is in the car with Sangyu and her suspicions grow as she notices his strange behavior. She feels like Sangyu has been watching her closely and he's been hiding his phone for some reason. Suyeon casually asks Sangyu about his dinner plans, and he tells her he already has plans with someone to whom he is indebted. Suyeon's mind flashes back to the mysterious woman she saw earlier. Irritated, she throws her contaminated choco taco into the trash. Suddenly, Suyeon and the woman make eye contact, and Suyeon tries to hide to avoid being noticed. However, the woman seems oblivious, as she doesn't react and just keeps walking. What bothers Suyeon more is how close the two seem, and she begins to wonder if they're old friends. Her heart sinks at the thought, and she desperately hopes they're just friends. Suyeon can't shake the fear that Sangyu might be the kind of person who would cheat on her. Suyeon rushes down the road to catch up, seeing Sangyu and the woman walking together. Sangyu thanks the woman for her help and refers to her as his sister, so Suyeon assumes she must be one of his 3 sisters. However, the woman reminds Sangyu that her time isn't free, and she recalls that he promised to take care of her today. Sangyu bows to her and asks where they should go next, flattering the woman. Now, they're at a restaurant, and Suyeon, who just happened to stumble upon them, is close by, spying on their interaction. The woman repeatedly asks Sangyu how the food is, insisting that it's yummy, but Sangyu is struggling with the spiciness, drinking water to cope. The woman laughs and teases him, saying he's still a child. Sangyu thinks she might be drunk, but he's never seen her act this way before. She then brings up an embarrassing memory of Sangyu passing out without his pants on in the street. As she aggressively wipes his face, Suyeon feels uncomfortable and decides to leave. The woman hadn't intended for Suyeon to flee. She wanted Suyeon to confront her. However, Suyeon didn't. Instead, she walks away, frustrated. Sangyut had told her he was with a friend, but this woman clearly wasn't just a friend. They seemed too close. Suyeon starts to wonder if Sangyut has been lying to her about his love all along. However, she slaps her cheeks and decides not to jump to conclusions until she knows what's really going on. First, though, she needs to eat. While eating macarons, Suyeon suddenly notices Sangyu and the woman again. They seem to be everywhere she goes. Suyeon begins to suspect that the woman is somehow predicting her movements. Soon, the woman enters a bathroom, and Suyeon, determined, waits for her outside. When the woman emerges, Suyeon confronts her, demanding that she say whatever it is she wants to say, instead of following her around all day. The woman, smiling, stands there confused. Suyeon continues accusing her of following her, but the woman only seems more puzzled. The woman asks Soo-yeon if they've met at a wedding or birthday, explaining that she struggles to remember faces. Soo-yeon confirms that this is their first time meeting. Then the woman suddenly realizes that this must be because of Sang-yu. Soo-yeon, confused, asks how she knows him. The woman reveals that they used to eat together every day and even slept under the same roof. Soo-yeon is shocked, and the woman casually asks how Soo-yeon knows Sang-yu. Looking at the ground, Soo-in replies that Sang-yu is just a work colleague. The woman accepts this and asks how Sang-yu is adapting to his job, but Soo-in ignores the question and instead boldly declares that she is Sang-yu's girlfriend. The woman is astonished. They then meet up with Sang-yu, who is annoyed that the woman would mess with Soo-in like that. The woman, however, was just having fun but still apologizes to Soo-in. The woman introduces herself as Sang-yu's oldest sister, Yeonji Choi. Soo-yeon, still processing everything, introduces herself as well. Yeonji, pondering the situation, smiles and says that Soo-yeon is her sister-in-law. Soo-yeon is taken aback, but Yeonji asks if it's okay to call her that since she's her brother's girlfriend. Soo-yeon hesitantly agrees. Yeonji says she has many questions for Soo-yeon, but that's for another day, and she leaves. Soo-yeon bows respectfully, while Sang-yu jokingly flips his sister off as she walks away. Now Soo-yeon and Sang-yu are walking together. Sang-yu apologizes, explaining that his sisters always mess with him. Soo-yeon smiles and says she understands, but Sang-yu is confused about why Soo-yeon is here at all, since she was supposed to be working from home today. Soo-yeon lies, saying she needed to buy something and just happened to bump into Yeonji by chance. Sang-yu, sensing something, changes the topic and explains that he needed his sister's help with something. He then apologizes again. Soo-yeon thinks it's about Yeonji's behavior, but Sang-yu seems to be apologizing for something else. He's been hesitating to tell her something important and is unsure if now is the right time. Soo-yeon feels a wave of dread wash over her, unsure of what he's about to say, leaving her devastated. Soo-yeon immediately assumes the worst and through tears thanks Sang-yu for everything. They've been dating for only a few weeks, and although she's been happy, she thinks it hasn't worked out. As she begins crying, Sang-yu stops her. Soo-yeon, desperate for answers, asks if he's been avoiding her. Sang-yu reassures her that he hasn't. Gathering his courage, Sang-yu presents Soo-yeon with a jewelry box, a symbol of their relationship. Soo-yeon is shocked as Sang-yu asks if she'll accept it. It's implied that she does, solidifying their bond. Meanwhile, back with Jia and Minchkil, they've just returned from the gym. Minchkil notes how hard Jia worked and says he wants to reward her. However, the reward turns out to be a surprise. He jokingly tases Jia. The joke is based on a Korean pun where the symbols for reward and fatal wound are similar. Suddenly, Jia wakes up from this strange dream, wondering why she always dreams weird things after leg day. As she walks, she's in immense pain. It's been a while since she last worked out, and Minchil really pushed her hard yesterday. This is definitely going to affect her work. Just then, Minchil appears in front of her, fresh from the shower with wet hair and no glasses. Jia is taken aback by how good-looking he is, wondering if Minchil has always been this handsome. Minchil, confused by Jia's reaction, continues making his chicken breast smoothie and casually asks if she wants protein powder. Jia declines, opting for the regular chicken breast smoothie. As she watches Minchil, Jia has a sudden realization. He has always been handsome, especially without his glasses. Her mind drifts back to their childhood when they were in elementary school. Jia remembers that Minchil was already good-looking back then. She even applied makeup to him once as a kid, making him even more striking. Minchil, seeing Jia's expression change, assumes she wants some protein powder after all, but she shakes her head and chugs her chicken breast smoothie, lost in thought. After they were done with the makeup, Minchil washed it off, and Jia felt a little bad, even though it was just practice for the talent show. Later, when Minchil left the bathroom, Jia apologized, telling him not to be mad. But Minchil wasn't mad at all. Jia kept apologizing and explained that it was her first time seeing him without glasses, and he was cuter than she expected, which is why she couldn't help herself. Minchil, however, took offense and told her not to call him cute since he's a guy. She should call him handsome instead. He added that even his own family thought he looked cute without glasses, which bothered him. Jia found this amusing and teased him, saying that his big eyes and long eyelashes were why people thought he was cute, but that he looked more manly with his glasses on. Minchiel, feeling a bit self-conscious, asked if that was really true. Jia laughed and admitted that it wasn't. In the present, Jia realizes that their interaction back then was more significant than she had thought. She asks Minchiel if he wears his glasses to look cool. Minchiel, puzzled, asks why she's suddenly bringing this up. Jia points out that he's been wearing the same glasses since they were little. Minchiel explains that he wears them because they're comfortable and practical, especially since he spends all day staring at a computer. The large lenses reduce eye strain, and he even has anti-blue light lenses for extra protection. Jia feels a bit disappointed that her comment back then didn't have a life-changing impact on Minchiel. Later, as they part ways to go to work, Minchiel recalls the same scene from their childhood, the one Jia had been thinking about. He smiles to himself, indicating that he still wears his glasses, partly to look manly, though it's more for comfort now. As Jia walks away, she still wishes Minchiel wouldn't wear glasses all the time. Nari, noticing that Jia is deep in thought, asks her what's wrong. Just then, Jia spots something that surprises her. Nari is reading one of her books. Jia remembers the day she published her first book, when she had appeared at a bookstore to buy a copy herself, only to find that everyone there was also buying her book. After Jia had run home celebrating her accomplishment, the bag she was carrying ripped, sending her books flying everywhere. Now, back in the present, Jia is puzzled as to why Nari is reading her book. She wonders if it's even still on sale, thinking it must just be a coincidence. But despite the years that have passed, seeing someone read her book still makes her feel embarrassed. Nervously, she asks Nari what she thinks of it. Nari, startled by Gia's anxious expression, bluntly responds, "The book sucks." Jia is shocked. Nari continues, saying it's cringe and reads like a teenager wrote it, but also admits that it's a fun read. Jia blushes, a mix of embarrassment and pride, and asks why Nari is reading it in the first place. Nari explains that she's reading it for a book report, leaving Jia confused. Nari elaborates that it's part of the cafe's best perk. The boss handpicks a book every Monday and puts it on a bulletin board. If someone writes a report about it and turns it in, they get 1,000,001. Jia is stunned. Nari continues, explaining that if you submit a report every week for a year, the boss will even pay for a vacation. Jia wonders why Yenju would offer such a benefit, but Nari explains it helps the boss with her own writing and encourages people to read her favorite works. The report only has to be 500 words, excluding spaces, so Nari sees it as an easy way to earn 1,000,000 extra per month. Still skeptical, Jia asks if this is some kind of April Fool's joke, but Nari insists it's true, adding that the boss will even buy the books for you. Later, after work, Jia and Minchiel are walking home together. Minchiel notices her sour expression and asks if something happened at work. Jia asks him, "If you could earn 1,000,000 for writing a book report, would you do it?" Minchi immediately thinks it sounds like a scam. Jia assures him it's not. Minchi does the math and points out that it's 201 won per word, which is tempting but warns Jia to be cautious because it could still be some kind of pyramid scheme. Hearing this makes Jia feel a bit foolish. When Jia gets home, frustrated, she kicks Minchi, then picks up her book, feeling conflicted. The idea of writing the report is too tempting to pass up, even though she had promised Yenju she wouldn't write anymore. Jia feels guilty but rationalizes it by telling herself it's just a report. Her inner voices argue, with one of her former selves pointing out that writing a report is still right. Jia silences that thought, thinking that if Yenju gets mad, she'll just apologize later. Jia quickly finishes the report and sends it off. Moments later, she receives the promised one, 0,000,001. She rushes out to show Minchiel, eager to prove it's not a scam, but he remains skeptical, still convinced it might be some sort of pyramid scheme. Meanwhile, Yenju and Yandok are drinking wine. Yandok is surprised that Yenju managed to get Jia to write again. Yandok notes that a book report isn't exactly writing, but Yenju counters by saying she never specified what kind of writing she wanted Jia to do. Regardless, Yandok is impressed by how Jia's report still reflects her distinctive style. Casual and engaging. He's also surprised Yenju accomplished this with only 1,000,001, but Yenju explains it wasn't the money that motivated Jia. Yenju created an environment where Jia felt comfortable, a space where she could set her own rules and rediscover her passion for writing without pressure. She believes this will gradually integrate writing back into Jia's daily life. Yenju remarks that Yenju must have spent a lot of time planning this out, but instead of responding directly, Yenju asks him if Jia's writing makes him happy. Yandok admits that Jia's writing is uniquely funny, but points out that the one who enjoys Jia's work the most is Yenju herself. Yandok suspects that Yenju has been subtly influencing Jia's life all along, but Yenju brushes it off, telling him it's none of his concern. She then reminds him that it's time to settle their bet. The wager was that if Yenju could get Jia to write, Yandok would have to drink anything she gave him. Yandok tries to deny this, but when Yenju threatens to cancel her book deal, he immediately agrees. Before Yandok starts drinking, he nervously asks Yenju if she's sure this is okay, reminding her that if he messes up, it'll be her fault. Yenju dismisses his concerns and orders him to drink. Yandok chugs his glass of wine, and Yenju applauds his effort. She then hands him some snacks, which at first seem like a relief, until Yandok notices they are an assortment of strange, unfamiliar items. Yenju refills his wine glass, telling him he has to keep drinking, and warns him that if he falls asleep before she does, he'll have to repeat this again. 3 hours later, Yandok finally passes out, having lasted much longer than expected. Yenju, amused, leans in toward him, gently touching his hair and adjusting his face. She gets closer to his lips, almost as if she's about to kiss him, but they're suddenly interrupted by the phone ringing. Yenju answers, and the voice on the other end instantly recognizes her. It's Yandok's son, suggesting that something significant happened between Yenju and Yandok in the past. Meanwhile, back with Mincheol and Jia, Jia is cursing him out while he flexes triumphantly. To understand how this situation came about, we must go back an hour. After Jia received the money from the book report, Mincheol was impressed by her work benefits. Mincheol, in typical fashion, was immersed in a popular fighting game, riding a 3-game winning streak. Jia, watching him play, admired his skills but also noticed that despite dating for 2 weeks and being happy together, their relationship hadn't really changed. Mincheol was still always gaming. While Jia didn't expect him to be overly romantic, she wished they could act a little more like a couple. That's when Jia got an idea. She challenged Mincheol to a match in the game he was playing. They were now sitting on the sofa, Mincheol in full gamer posture, ready to dominate. This was exactly the kind of playful interaction their relationship needed. They agreed that the loser would have to do whatever the winner wanted. All Jia needed to do was beat Mincheol 1 time. But that was proving to be harder than expected. This plan is brilliant, and no matter what happens, it's sure to create a fun, light-hearted atmosphere for their relationship. The idea seems flawless. However, when Mincheol says that if he wins, they'll go jogging, Jia thinks he's joking. They already exercise plenty, and she was hoping for something more romantic. But Mincheol never jokes about exercise, and Jia realizes her plan to spice up their relationship might backfire if she loses. The game begins, and it's intense. Jia expected Mincheol to go easy on her, but he's more focused than ever, not holding back. She's close to winning the round, but out of nowhere, Mincheol one-shots her. Frustrated, Jia curses him out, and Mincheol rubs it in by emoting on her victory screen. Jia is devastated, but Mincheol tells her not to feel bad, saying he has a massive advantage due to his experience. Jia, however, refuses to accept defeat, especially after losing 10 games in a row. Mincheol suggests they stop for the night, saying they both have work tomorrow and offering to count her close wins as victories. But Jia is determined, and she insists on playing one more game, warning Mincheol that she'll know if he loses on purpose. It's now 3:46 a.m., and Jia has still lost every match. Despite Minchiel looking visibly exhausted, Jia demands one more round. She's discovered a strategy: to level the playing field. Jia decides to sit on Minchiel's lap while they play. Minchiel is confused and asks how he's supposed to see the screen, but that's the point. He can't. The match begins and Jia's plan is finally paying off. She's winning. Suddenly, Minchiel picks Jia up by her legs, flipping her upside down. The odds shift back in his favor, but Jia fights back by pinching him. After a chaotic, hard-fought battle, Jia manages to win, locking Minchiel in an armbar as she celebrates her victory. She eagerly asks how it feels to lose to his rookie wife in a fighting game. Minchiel, utterly devastated, begs for one more rematch, but Jia refuses, playfully saying she doesn't waste time fighting weaklings. Minchiel admits defeat, acknowledging that if Jia went to such lengths to win, she must have something she really wants him to do. However, Jia suddenly forgets what she intended to ask. Just then, a small devil version of Jia appears, encouraging her to take this chance to leave a lasting impression on Minchiel. But before the devil Jia can convince her, an angelic version of Jia steps in, suggesting they engage in something more innocent. Embarrassed, Jia crushes the angel Jia's argument. At that moment, Minchiel calls out to her, suggesting that they should sleep soon. Jia, however, knows that this is an opportunity she might never get again. She quickly tells Minchiel to meet her at the park entrance on Saturday at noon, warning him that he'll be slapped once for every second he's late. As Jia waits at the park, the devil and angel versions of herself debate whether she should have gone further, but Jia is still too shy to take it to the next level. It's almost noon, and Minchiel still hasn't arrived, despite leaving the house an hour ago. Jia starts to wonder if he went to the gym, but she can't believe he would skip this special day for that. Just as her impatience is about to peak, she hears her name from a distance. She turns and is shocked to see Minchiel, looking incredibly handsome in fashionable clothes and without his glasses. Jia is taken aback by how good he looks and compliments his outfit, surprised that he knows how to dress so well. Minchiel in turn compliments her, saying she looks pretty. Jia's heart races and she brushes off the compliment, trying to stay calm. They head to a renowned sushi restaurant where Minchiel has made a reservation, and Jia wonders if this is really the same Minchiel. But as their day unfolds, the stylish appearance fades into a more relaxed vibe as they enjoy a light workout together to digest the sushi, which turns out to be just bowling. Jia is having fun, surprised by how much she's enjoying herself. She realizes that despite their different hobbies, she and Minchiel have always had fun together, even as kids. Maybe they aren't so different after all. After bowling, Minchiel's behavior takes a surprising turn. He becomes unusually considerate, taking her shopping, watching a movie, and even risking his gains by drinking beer at a bar. This shift in his behavior feels out of the ordinary, as Minchiel has always tried his best at everything he does. Seeing his efforts makes Jia happy, and she gives him 100 points for the date. It could have been higher, though. Minchiel humbly claims he hasn't done anything special, but when Jia suggests they drink beer like this every night, Minchiel realizes he's been checkmated. As the night goes on, Jia asks how far Minchiel intends to take their date, but they end up sitting in awkward silence for 5 minutes, not using their phones. Jia starts to panic, and her devilish side thinks she should go all the way to secure Minchiel. Her angelic side agrees with the devil, as today feels like the perfect opportunity, and she may not get another chance. Nervously, Jia breaks the silence, asking how far Minchiel plans to take it. Minchiel confidently replies that he's going to take it all the way. What a Chad. Minchiel grabs Jia's hand and repeatedly asks how far she plans to take it. Just as their romantic moment intensifies, they are interrupted by a misunderstanding with Sue, who mistakes Minchiel for someone trying to hit on Jia. Nari had warned him not to, but Minchiel didn't listen. Sue then asks if Jia and Minchiel are on a date, and Jia quickly lies, claiming they're just on a walk. Nari and SIU avoid answering when Jia asks them the same question. Eventually they all leave, and Minchiel apologizes for being too pushy at the bar. But this is exactly what Jia wanted, and she loved the day. Still, there's one problem. Jia doesn't like how Minchio is trying to be someone he isn't. Taking this into account, Jia reduces her score for the date to 98 points because Minch apologized earlier and she prefers confidence. Minchiel takes this personally and surprises Jia by hugging her as she walks away, trying to make up for the lost points. But Jia avoids the situation by claiming she's feeling hot, attributing it to her heart racing. Minchiel apologizes, thinking she's referring to the temperature, but Jia doesn't like this and tells him to stop apologizing. Suddenly, Jia pulls Minchiel in and kisses him. She does this as an example of what Minchiel should be doing, because showing affection for each other is normal for couples. Her point is that it's okay for Minchiel to make mistakes, and he doesn't need to apologize for something that isn't wrong. Minchiel, moved by her words, suddenly kisses her back before they go home. Minchiel wants to stop at the convenience store on the way back, and while Jia waits outside, she thinks about what he might be getting. Could it be something starting with C-O-N? Maybe he's picking up hangover medicine, but she doubts it. Her mind runs wild, and she starts to think the only reasonable conclusion is that Minchiel is preparing for something spicy. While Jia waits outside, someone recognizes her. It's Gang Yu-jo, a tall, well-liked guy she met when she was a sophomore in college. He used to cover her with his jacket and they always got along. 10 years after college, they run into each other again at the convenience store. They exchange friendly greetings, but Minchiel suddenly appears and apprehends Gang Yu, thinking he's trying to pick up Jia. Jia quickly diffuses the situation before Minchiel can break Gang Yu's arm and introduces Minchiel as her husband. As they leave, Gang Yu suggests that they should all meet up again, because other college friends are worried about Jia. Jia and Mitya are now in a taxi on the way home, and Jia explains that Gang Yu is just someone she knew in college, but there's more to it than that. Something traumatic happened between them back in college. Meanwhile, Gang Yu arrives home and tells someone named Jisoo Jia, who also knew Jia in college, that he ran into her today. Jisoo is shocked by the news. After Jia was whisked away into Mitchell's bedroom and vanished for months, she finally reappears, but this time she's left the city and is on an exciting trip abroad. She's loving the fresh breeze of foreign air and the change of scenery. Most of all, she's thrilled to share this experience with her Chad husband, Mel, and her parents, who are having the time of their lives fishing without her. How fun for them. But how did Jia end up in this situation? It all started when Jia got a notification reminding her that her dad's 60th birthday was coming up. When she mentioned it to Mitchell, he thought it was a big deal. Jia, on the other hand, was unconcerned. Her dad had told her not to worry about it. Who even celebrates their 60th birthday these days, she had thought. But when she brought it up with her sister asked if Jia was an idiot. Who actually takes Dad at face value like that? Naturally, Jia insisted she never believed it, but we all know the truth. Then, out of the blue, Jia got a call from Mitchell's mum, inviting her on a trip abroad. Jia was confused at first, but Mitchell's mum explained that she had won the trip in a golfing competition. Looks like Mel isn't the only Chad in the family. Before long, they were all on a flight headed to their exotic destination, and everyone was having a blast at the beach. Well, everyone except Jia. That brings us to the present. Jia's dad is in his element, reeling in a huge catch, practically glowing with joy. Jia's parents are endlessly grateful to Mel for spoiling them with this trip, asking him to send their thanks to his family. Mel assures them he will. Everything seems perfect, until Mitchell notices Jia sitting off to the side, arms crossed, clearly uninterested in the whole thing. Mitchell notices Jia's sour mood and asks why she's angry. Jia immediately snaps back, asking what he's talking about, as if he's the one being ridiculous. Mitchell explains that Jia looks like she's sprouting horns with the expression she's wearing. But Jia, still avoiding the issue, brushes it off and asks Mel to explain further. Mitchell, reading between the lines, assumes Jia's just upset. Jia denies it, saying it's way more complicated than that. Too hard to put into words. To name a few reasons, she doesn't like being on a trip with her parents, she hates fishing, she's just gotten off a long flight, and, to top it off, she's seasick. Seeing this, Mitchell decides to think fast. Using his extensive knowledge of all things Gia, he devises a plan to lift her mood. He starts by asking Gia if she wants to see something cool. Confused, Gia nods. Mitchell folds his hands and tells her to look closely, warning that it might be hard to see. Gia, curious but skeptical, leans in to inspect his hands, trying to figure out what he's up to. Suddenly, Mitchell catches her off guard by leaning in and planting a quick kiss on her lips. Gia's so startled that she yells at him, smacking him on the back of the neck in embarrassment. But Mitchell has already braced himself for her reaction, ready for whatever she throws his way. To make things worse, Gia's parents start teasing her, implying she's in a physically active relationship, if you catch their drift. Flustered, Gia denies everything, frantically asking Mitchell why he'd do something like that out of the blue. Mitchell, a bit confused, asks if Gia didn't like it, trying to justify his spontaneous kiss by explaining his reasoning. But as he continues, it dawns on him that Gia actually hated it. Now, disappointment washes over him as he realizes his efforts to cheer her up have only made things worse. Seeing Mitchell's reaction, Gia is at a loss for words. Deep in thought, she knows Mitchell is sly like a wolf, and he's framed the situation in such a way that she can't easily dodge his question. Instead of answering, Gia places her hands on Mitchell's shoulders and leans in, bringing them face to face. Just as their lips are about to meet, the ship's captain yells out that a big wave is incoming, urgently commanding everyone to take cover for their safety. But safety is the last thing on Gia's mind. The captain just ruined the mood, and surely the wave can't be that big, right? Gia and Mitchell turn around, only to be met by the sight of a massive wave, towering many times higher than their boat. They're both speechless. Mitchell instinctively tries to shield Gia, but the sheer force of the wave hurls them both into the ocean. In an eerie reflection of the start of her vacation, the sun is still shining and Gia, now adrift, is enjoying the freedom from the suffocating city life. Perhaps a bit too much freedom this time. Weeks pass, and Gia has been stranded on a remote island. One day, while sitting alone, Gia hears her name being called. To her surprise, it's Mitchell, returning from a fishing trip, dressed in a stylish, almost absurdly fashionable outfit. He's laughing and in high spirits, as if he's living the perfect island life. Though relieved to see him, Gia can't help but wonder how they ended up in this bizarre situation. After the wave sank the ship, Gia washed up on the shore of this remote island, surviving only because she'd been wearing a life vest. When she first woke up, disoriented and alone, she panicked. Seeing Mitchell's glasses next to her but no sign of him, she feared the worst. In a fit of emotion, she screamed out his name, thinking she was sending him off into the afterlife. Little did she know, Mitchell was right behind her the entire time, alive and well. Concerned by Gia's behavior, he asks her what's going on. Shocked to see him, Gia tries to play it cool and act like nothing happened, despite Mitchell having witnessed the whole scene. Mel calmly explains the situation to Gia. He also woke up on this island after the shipwreck, and as far as he knows, Gia is the only other person within 500 meters. At first, Gia thinks it's fine since they're both safe, but then a horrifying realization strikes her. Her parents are missing. Panic rising, Gia desperately asks Mel if he's seen them. His silence and expression say it all. Gia's heart sinks. She collapses to the ground, overwhelmed by the thought of her parents being gone. She blames herself, thinking that if she had convinced them not to go on this trip, none of this would have happened. But despite her despair, she clings to hope, insisting they'll search the entire island together to find them. Mitchell, however, knows Gia isn't thinking clearly. He calls out her full name in an attempt to snap her out of it, but she's too focused on finding her parents. Defensive and frantic, she refuses to listen. Desperate to calm her down, Mitchell quickly forces something into her mouth. Gia has an immediate, intense reaction, gagging and trying to spit out the disgusting taste. She starts pouting, demanding to know what he just gave her. Mitchell nonchalantly explains that it's saponin. a bitter bioactive compound found in many plants, known for its sterilizing properties. Gia rolls her eyes, frustrated, and says she doesn't care about the science. She just wants to know what she ate. Ignoring her complaints, Mitchell grabs her face and checks to see if the panic has subsided. Relieved to see that Gia has returned to her normal self, he tells her to calm down. He reassures her that while she's worried about her parents, her fears aren't reality. If they landed safely, the others should be okay too. Gia thinks about it and reluctantly agrees, though she's annoyed that Mitchell is treating her like a child. But despite everything, she manages to smile, feeling a bit more at ease in the situation. Gia can't deny that Mitchell's approach is working. She starts to wonder if having someone comfort her without words has always been this therapeutic. As Mitchell inspects her ear, he suddenly asks what happened to it. Gia, confused, asks what he means. Mitchell explains that something seems off. Her ear feels colder than usual. Gia brushes it off, saying it's probably just because she was in the water, but Mitchell doesn't buy it. He's convinced her ear temperature is dangerously low and insists it needs to be warmed up immediately. Panicked, Mitchell places his hands over Gia's ears and declares that if her temperature stays low in this heat, she's in danger. Gia, still confused, tries to process what he's saying. Mitchell, growing more urgent, yells that she could die if they don't fix this fast. The seriousness finally sinks in, and Gia stomps her feet, anxiously asking what she should do to stay alive. Mitchell explains that they're both in bad shape from being in the water for so long. The first step to warming up is getting out of their wet clothes, as the damp fabric is making them colder. Hearing this, Gia suddenly realizes the severity of the situation. She recalls the #1 rule in disaster survival: maintain body temperature. To do that, you need to find a heat source, stay dry, and, if necessary, share body heat with others. That thought brings Gia to the only logical conclusion. The best way to stay warm is to share body heat with Mel. She's prepared for this and, truthfully, a little excited at the prospect. But Mitchell has other plans. Instead of getting cozy, Mitchell instructs Gia to lie down on a large rock under the sun, where she'll absorb maximum heat. Reluctantly, Gia complies. As she lies there, feeling the sun's rays beating down on her, she starts to feel like she's being grilled alive, hot and uncomfortable. But that means Mitchell's plan is working. Now that Gia's front side is warmed up, Mitchell tells her to flip over onto her stomach like a fish being grilled. She feels like she's in a bathhouse, exfoliating under the sun. As she lies there, relaxing, Gia can't help but feel relieved that Mitchell is with her. Without him, she would probably be scared and crying. She thanks him, but Mitchell, busy grinding a green substance, is confused. He asks what she's thanking him for, assuming these are Gia's last words before she dies. Annoyed, Gia snaps back, frustrated that Mitchell can't even accept a simple compliment. But Mitchell remains serious, reminding her that it's too early to feel safe. He stands up, holding the freshly ground green substance, determined to use it at all costs. Gia watches him approach, terrified. Fire, he explains, is a heavenly gift to humanity, as dangerous as it is useful. Burns, especially from fire, are among the most painful things humans can experience. But surprisingly, fire isn't the biggest cause of burns. It's the sun. This, Mitchell says, is why Gia needs to apply the green substance to her skin to protect herself from sunburn. Despite his explanation, Gia is still suspicious of the sticky green stuff and doesn't want to use it. Mitchell, undeterred, explains that it's made of seaweed, a common ingredient in skincare products. But Gia covers her ears, refusing to listen to any more of Mitchell's seaweed propaganda. Mitchell won't give up, though. He warns her that direct sunlight causes skin to age prematurely. Gia's life flashes before her eyes as she imagines her skin wrinkling in the sun. Without hesitation, she grabs the seaweed mixture and slathers it on her face. Now, with their perfect skin protected, the crisis is averted. For the moment. Gia and Mitchell begin discussing how to survive on the island. Mitchell suggests they start by making a fire. Gia is confused, thinking water would be the natural first step, but Mitchell explains that even though water is essential, it can be dangerous if it contains bacteria. To stay safe, they'll need to boil it first, which requires a fire. Normally, getting water would be the first step, but since they still have some energy left, it's better to focus on making the fire. Gia admits she doesn't know how to make a fire and assumes they'll have to rub sticks together. But Mitchell has a different plan. He's found a water bottle that washed up on the beach. His plan is to fill it with water and use the bottle to concentrate sunlight onto a specific spot, creating enough heat to start a fire. Mitchell carefully holds the bottle, focusing the sunlight, while Gia works with the stick. She warns Mitchell that he'll be in serious trouble if he burns her hand with the sunlight. Mitchell, concentrating intensely, holds the bottle steady, while Gia vigorously spins the stick on top of the wood. After a few moments of effort, Gia's determined expression practically scares the wood into catching fire. For Mitchell, this is just another day, but Gia is thrilled. She throws her hand out for a high five, and after a moment of consideration, Mitchell gives her one. They stand back to admire the fire they worked so hard to make. However, a new problem arises. Gia is now feeling too hot, and the fire is only making things worse. She tries to cool down by adjusting her dress for ventilation, but it doesn't help. Mitchell, noticing her efforts, quickly looks away and moves to sit farther from her. Gia is confused by Mitchell's sudden distance and asks why he's sitting so far away from her. Naturally, Mitchell quickly changes the subject and points at a seagull flying overhead. He wonders aloud if it has enough protein to help him maintain his gains. Gia, amused, confirms that seagulls are friends of the chicken species. Mitchell then asks if she's ever had bird meat other than chicken and tries to make eye contact with her, but the sight of her is too much for him. He quickly hides his face. Gia notices and asks what's wrong. Mitchell, fumbling for an excuse, claims there's an insect near her, causing Gia to panic. She stands up, frantically trying to brush the non-existent bug away since she hates insects. Mitchell watches, momentarily breathless at how captivating she looks, even in her panic, but he manages to keep his composure. Mitchell then pivots, mentioning the heat and asking if Gia is thirsty. Without waiting for a reply, he sprints off to find water. Gia calls after him, suggesting they go together, but Mitchell insists someone needs to keep the fire alive and delegates the task to her. Gia, without any suspicion, agrees and assumes Mitchell just has a lot of energy. Meanwhile, Mitchell is deep in the forest, leaning against a tree, trying to calm himself down. Every time he looks at Gia, she seems more beautiful, no matter the situation. It's overwhelming, and he can't stop imagining her, his thoughts filled with her at every angle. Desperate to get a hold of himself, Mitchell repeatedly slams his head against the tree, trying to regain focus. He knows he can't continue acting like this around her. Finally, Mitchell takes a deep breath, adjusts his glasses, and decides to pull himself together. He rationalizes that this intense attraction is only temporary, likely caused by the adrenaline rush from their life-or-death situation. With newfound resolve, Mitchell locks in and heads back toward Gia, determined to act normal. Suddenly, Mitchell hears Gia scream and sprints toward her at full speed, ready to save her. When he arrives, he sees Gia backed up against a tree, face to face with a venomous snake. From a documentary she watched, Gia remembers that snakes usually only attack when provoked, so she should be okay if she stays calm, but she can't stand still forever. Thinking quickly, Gia sprints toward the fire. Just as she reaches it, the snake lunges at her. She braces for the worst, but instead of biting her, the snake sinks its fangs into her shirt. At that very moment, Mitchell appears, wearing a makeshift cloth around his arm, which the snake bites instead of Gia. With Gia still in shock, Mitchell swiftly removes the snake, pulls his arm back, and hurls it into the sun with all his strength. Gia can't believe what just happened and is overwhelmed with gratitude for Mitchell saving her. Mitchell grabs her shoulders and frantically asks if she's hurt, if the snake bit her. Gia tries to tell him she's fine, but Mitchell is panicking, talking about needing to perform first aid, seemingly oblivious to her reassurances. Seeing how panicked he is, Gia gives him a light, playful double-handed slap to get his attention. "I'm fine," she insists. Thank you for saving me. She asks if he's calmed down now, telling him that without his intervention, her life would have been cut short by 10 years from fear alone. But as her adrenaline fades, Gia suddenly becomes aware of Mitchell's lack of clothing. Embarrassed, she asks why he isn't wearing anything. Mitchell explains that it was an emergency, and in situations like this it's best to cover exposed skin with fabric to protect against wild animals. Gia, still a bit flustered, is more annoyed that Mitchell had the foresight to prepare for the situation but didn't include her in those plans. Mitchell tries to laugh it off, but Gia smirks and gives him a hug, thanking him again for saving her life. The gesture catches Mitchell off guard. While Gia feels relief and gratitude, she notices that something seems off with him. Mitchell looks uncomfortable, not his usual composed self. She realizes that maybe he's dealing with something else, something deeper, and wonders if now's the right time to ask. Later, Mitchell approaches Gia in his newly improvised yet classy outfit, beaming with excitement. "I found something amazing," he says, urging her to come check it out. Mitchell has discovered a stream and Gia's face lights up. Without hesitation, she jumps in, overjoyed at finally having a way to cool off from the scorching heat. As she tries to drink from the stream, Mitchell quickly stops her, pulling out a pot he found and reminding her they need to boil the water first to make it safe. Soon, night falls, and Gia is astounded by everything Mitchell has managed to accomplish in just one day. He set up a makeshift campsite with 10 pieces of styrofoam for the floor, fashioned chairs, and managed to get clean water, all of which gives their camp a surprisingly modern look. Gia, who was initially expecting to live out her primitive survival fantasy by building huts from mud, is amazed. Mitchell interrupts her thoughts, explaining survival tip number 2, use everything you have. He tells her he had originally planned to make their shelter from tree branches, but noticed trash washed up on the beach, which turned out to be extremely useful. He holds out a cup of water he's cleaned thoroughly, explaining that while it may have started as trash, it's now as good as new. Mitchell adds that Gia doesn't have to use it if she feels uncomfortable, but Gia, touched by Mitchell's efforts, gratefully accepts it. She drinks the water without hesitation, acknowledging that in their situation, they don't have the luxury of being picky. Seeing how much work Mitchell has put in, Gia feels a wave of guilt for her earlier tantrum. He's been comforting her since they were on the boat, saved her from the snake, and worked tirelessly to make their camp livable, while she hasn't done much to help him in return. She reflects on how scared she had been upon arriving, but everything felt easier because Mitchell was always by her side. As she thanks him for all he's done today, Mitchell blushes, trying to play it off as no big deal. Gia knows better. He's just shy. With a warm smile, she rests her head on his shoulder and reassures him. "We'll make it home alive." As they sit together by the fire, their first night on the island comes to a close, a quiet moment of peace amid the uncertainty of their situation. Gia is wide awake, her heart racing as Mitchell leans in. For a moment it feels like their connection is about to shift to something more intense, but suddenly, Gia's mind drifts back to that intense night in their bedroom. She reflects on their journey, getting married and deciding to have their first official date. They seem to glide over the hurdles of marriage and living together, but now, with dating, they've stumbled. It's not that their relationship has gotten worse, just different. Gia recalls the awkwardness, like the time their hands touched at the gym, and Mitchell immediately apologized. She wonders if married couples often apologize for things as trivial as this. Mitchell sheepishly admits that it's part of the awkwardness that has developed since they started dating. Their relationship is in a metaphorical traffic jam, caught in a confusing, unspoken place. Back in the present, Gia wonders if Mitchell is trying to resolve that traffic jam by making a move now that their survival situation is mostly under control. Is he trying to take the next step in their relationship? Gia feels a rush of excitement, thinking maybe they're going to get wild and free like animals in the wild. She likes this bold side of Mitchell, but also considers pushing him away, unsure if now is the right time. Mitchell, however, is undeterred. He leans in, whispering in Gia's ear, "Be quiet. The thrill of the moment consumes Gia, and Mitchell moves to grab her waist. Gia's heart races, unsure if this is really happening. She tries to stop him, but Mitchell presses a finger to her lips and promises it won't take long. That one simple action snaps something inside Gia. It feels like her heart is going to burst. In the heat of the moment, Gia wonders if she should just stop resisting and give herself over to Mitchell. She finally decides, I'm okay. I'm ready for everything you're about to do. Mitchell is relieved she's on the same page, and Gia, in her excitement, imagines how she might not be able to walk the next morning. But then Mitchell takes a step back, his tone shifting. He announces, on the count of 3, we'll rush outside and fight the bears that are approaching our tent. Gia, caught off guard, goes along with it, fully expecting a thrilling moment. But then she realizes what Mitchell really said. When Mitchell counts to 3, they both rush outside, making loud noises by yelling and banging random objects together. The bears, clearly startled by the noise, take one look at Mitchell and flee as fast as they can. Exhausted, Mitchell turns to Gia and asks if she's okay. Gia, standing there in stunned silence, feels a sense of disappointment. She had expected something far different, but of course, this was Mitchell.